to use your calculator. But please don't receive incoming calls. We will take breaks as required. I'll make the call just to make sure that people get the chance to clear their phones and to also use the bathroom if they need to. And I'm going to ask everybody please to stand now, and Councillor Wang, you're going to open our meeting today with a karakia.
E te atua kaharawa, ko koi te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātou ranga. Manaaki kia mai mātou, waipononga I tēnei wā, e mahi nei I a mātou mahi. O te painga o na tangata o te kaunihira o na roto o Rotorua. Takua mai kia tau te rangi marie ki runga I a mātou I na wakatoa. Ko ihu karaiti, uki tō mātou ariki. Amene. Almighty God, who alone is the leader of all mankind and the foundation of all knowledge, send thy blessing upon us, your servants, this day, as we strive to do all things good for the betterment of the people of the Rotorua district. May we be tolerant in ourselves at all times. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Councillor Wang, and I think that's the first time you've said a council prayer, isn't it? No, it's not. So we'll now move to the apologies, and it's great to see we've got a full muster this morning, so there are no apologies. We'll move on to the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Your Worship.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I declare I have a non-financial conflict of interest in respect of item 11.1 in confidential. I won't be participating in the discussion or debate.
Okay. Are there any further conflicts of interest?
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order, Councillor.
I note there are no further conflicts of interest, and I just want to raise the issue of Councillor McPherson as a submitter in respect of the matter at item 6.2 in the agenda. Despite legal advice he received, he chose at committee to debate the matter and vote. And I would just like it noted in the minutes that, again, contrary to the legal advice that it could prejudice council's decision making, he has not declared a conflict.
Thank you, and that should be noted in the minutes. That's Councillor Maxwell.
At our committee meeting, I did lodge my objection to Councillor McPherson being a submitter and then also being a decision maker around the table. Although it was noted at the meeting, will it be noted here as well? I lodged my objection on that one. And I'd also like to ask a question. What position does that also put Councillor Bentley in when at times he has said that he steps back because he has a conflict of interest being involved with Fulton Hogan? Is that going to happen today?
Well, that is
through you.
They're both valid points that I accept. It is for individual councillors to declare their conflict of interest, and that's something that I reserve for Councillor Bentley. That's why I looked around the table, and in the instance also of noting in the minutes Councillor McPherson being a submitter, I do recall very clearly that he was very, very clear that he had an open mind, but subsequent to the open mind and the vote that day, he has clearly shown a predetermined view. But we need to note that in the minutes. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I feel that my wife's first child by her first marriage marrying into the Fulton family is quite removed from my sphere of influence. I certainly don't benefit financially from any of the Fulton trust funds and so forth, as much as I would like to. However, I do not feel I have any conflict of interest at all.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley, and it's good to have that clarified. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. I see the ongoing determination of some people to make what I regard as spurious comments about predetermination.
Councillor McPherson,
I'll hold you up.
No, Councillor McPherson, I'll hold you up. You must be terribly careful about language. There haven't been spurious comments made. You mustn't use that language. I will call that as a point of disorder and warn you not to use words that are inflammatory. Now, you may continue.
Thank you. And I would propose to illustrate what I meant by that comment you regard as unfortunate or you've debarred. First is, I follow the precedent. When I presented at the hearings and exercised my rights as a member of the public, a citizen, I followed the precedent.
Councillor McPherson, I've ruled on this. We've ruled on this. We will note in the minutes that you have ignored the legal advice. You've chosen to ignore the legal advice. I've ruled on this. We will be moving on, and I'll make that decision from the chair. Right, we move on now to urgent items not on the agenda. Do we have any urgent items? There appear to be none. I move on now to confirmation of the minutes. I require a mover and a seconder for the motion that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 28th of May be confirmed as a true and correct record. Thank you. Councillor Rotorua, seconded Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. The councillor minutes on the 9th of July, a mover and a seconder that the minutes held on the 9th of July be confirmed as a true and accurate record. Councillor Donaldson moved. Councillor Yates seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. Recommendations from other committees. The report of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting on the 2nd of July. That was in relation to remits. That I need a mover that the report of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting held on the 2nd of July be received. Moved Councillor Rotorua, seconded Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. I can speak a little to that. The remit that we supported and put forward about the 4-year term for Parliament is going to be carried through to the AGM by whangare with the support of 5 other councils, and we're one of those. And there will be an amendment from the floor to clarify that we are not supporting that the Rotorua position is for a 4-year term of Parliament and then a subsequent 4-year rolling term for local authorities. But it has the support to go through.
Yes, Madam Chair, may I just ask a question, please? With only 5 other territorial authorities supporting the remit, are we likely to be successful on that? Because I think this is quite a significant piece.
To put a remit motion for the AGM, you only need 5 councils. It'll be debated by everybody on the floor. It'll be wide open debate. Yeah. Thank you. And then we don't know how it will go. Right, a mover and a seconder for the motion that the following recommendations of the operations... we've received the report. We've got to vote that council support this remit. Yep. I'll just read it first. That council supports the remit that will be submitted at the LGNZ AGM on the 21st of August as part of a multi-council remit. I move. Do I have a second?
Chair.
Seconder, Councillor Rotorua. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, carried. move next to the report of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting on the 23rd of July, page 17. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, that the report of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting on the 23rd of July be received?
Thank you, Madam
Councillor
Chair. It is my
Rotorua.
committee, so I'm happy to chair.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Now, we're now going to move to a PowerPoint presentation by Mr. Michael. Thank you. And joined by Thomas Collet, our CFO. Thank you. Welcome.
Kia ora tātou katoa. Good morning. Namaste, kalimera. Thank you for this opportunity to present again the scope of our recommendations. Through you, Your Worship, obviously we've got in front of elected members a report with a recommendation. That report and recommendation is a product of a long process of about 3 years since it started. However, I will, through my presentation, walk you through as synoptically as I can, so the rationale that underpins our recommendation is, again, made clear. I think it's also quite important to do that, so our governance body is able to consider with an open mind the recommendations and to arrive at your resolution, at the end of your considerations. I strongly believe that this is a very important matter and deals with one of our significant parts of our core infrastructure. Our wastewater services, are, I believe, one of the fundamental foundational services to the community. Its effective management implies significant impacts on the health of our community, the health of our environment, and in general the well-being of our community. Financially, comprises about 1/4 of all the assets this council owns, and therefore the way we manage those assets and the way we manage the service and its effectiveness is quite an important matter for this council and for the organization in general. Again, I would like to emphasize that, the way we progress through these wastewater services and the approaches we have adopted are clearly articulated in our current infrastructure strategy, the 30-year infrastructure strategy that's been adopted by the council in 2018. And that strategy is valid, and the strategies that embraced and embodied into the recommendations are clearly aligned with those strategies. The purpose of this, the process we're going to follow today in this presentation is that I will talk a little bit about the case for change for the wastewater services, and I will try to articulate as to why do we need the proposal. It's quite important, obviously, to outline the challenges that we have faced in other parts of our infrastructure in general and how we have addressed those challenges systematically over the last few years. I will outline how we got to where we're here today for you to consider our recommendation and adopt a final resolution to that process. I also talk a little bit about the nature of the proposal, the context of the proposal, the detail of the proposal, so it's quite clear there is no ambiguity as to what you're considering and how that proposal will help us address some of the challenges we have identified. And obviously, it's quite important also for you too, because you are asked to consider to engage into a contractual partnership with an external party to deliver some core fundamental services for the organization. I think it's also quite important for you to understand what is the current situation of the service and what are the conditions under the proposal will entail. Again, it's been quite widely known and is not a secret to anyone that for the last 3 years we have been anticipating that the government will take a much proactive role in issues related to fresh water. The government's approach has been driven by a significant level by what they have been witnessing and assessing the Three Waters infrastructure to be across the country. And Rotorua is no different to the rest of the country. Like the rest of New Zealand, we are experiencing some significant challenges in our three waters and systems.
Mr. Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Stavros, but there may be people sitting in the chambers today that don't actually know what the Three Waters system actually comprises of. It doesn't require a major explanation, but it's so important because the government has just released the report on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I just wondered if an explanation could be given. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tak. Three Waters comprises our fundamental services in the areas of services for drinking water. And again, one of the drivers behind that is the incident in Havelock North in recent years where a significant portion of the population got sick because of pollution onto that water. It is a wastewater services, the sewage we produce in all our houses and our trading and business activities that needs to be captured, conveyed, processed before it is released into the environment. And that poses a significant health risk to the community, but also to our environment. And the government now is recognizing the impact of that legacy issue with the wastewater. And the third water is the management of stormwater. The management of stormwater has got two elements to that. One is the quantity, is the volume, the amount of stormwater that is generated, how it's managed to avoid flooding and damaging to properties, but also the quality of stormwater. You will find that most of our receiving environment receives a significant pollution and contamination from airborne stormwater because it carries with it pollutants that comes from paved surfaces, roofs, gutters, open channels, and so on. And obviously, the government considers the management of stormwater to be one of the fundamental impacts onto the environment. The government's approach signaled some time ago that local authorities who control the Three Waters utilities must comply with evolving higher standards for fresh water quality and must meet expectations from our communities and help safeguard our environment. Historically, the management of those three waters had a fundamental principle of serving the needs of people. The Three Waters reform approach is reversing that and saying that the needs and the health of the environment comes first and the needs of people come second. And you will find increasingly regulations come to that effect, and those regulations will be embodied into new resource concerns, new extraction concerns, and the management of global stormwater concerns. So therefore, our fundamental approach and requirement as a TLA who owns and operates utilities is that we have to ensure that we provide a safe, a reliable, and a cost-effective operation for all three waters, but for the purposes of today, the attention and the focus will be on our water services. Now, what the government started some time ago to review under the Three Waters reform considerations is that they have identified that under investment over a number of years across the country, and you would have seen recently some publications which indicated two waters alone, drinking water and wastewater, have a replacement value across the country in the order of $100 billion. That imposes a significant financial obligation onto TLAs to make sure that they invest regularly and at the appropriate level. And the recent publications from the government and other professional organizations identified that in the immediate future, the country faces a $4 billion bill to upgrade their wastewater treatment plants to meet minimum standards. And considering that wastewater treatment plants and related facilities comprise about 1/4 of a wastewater system, the extrapolation is that probably there's an immediate need of between $20 and $25 billion to be invested in the wastewater services to make sure that they meet current and emerging standards. And obviously the historical underinvestment that's been identified by the government is becoming a little bit of a barrier in that, in that ability of TLAs and utility operators to meet rising standards, and obviously to meet the new regulatory requirements and, more importantly, community expectations. The government has appointed a new regulator office in December last year, and we can expect to see an ongoing development of new regulations with which we need to comply with. Now, addressing those challenges through improved service delivery is intended, according to the government, to facilitate good public health, environmental outcomes, increase resilience to climate change, and to enhance the community overall well-being. I would suggest that this is our core fundamental purpose of existence as a TLA, in that in addressing challenges faced by our utility services, we do so in order to make sure our service delivery is at the optimum level and facilitates good public health, environmental outcomes, and provides for increases in resiliency to climate change and to enhance community well-being. So in effect, we should be in perfect alignment with our government intention. The question is that how do you do that, and what approaches do you take to that effect? So we are in total alignment with our government proposal. I want to take a little bit of a history. I came up here in 2015. My understanding that in 2014, the Council has undergone a significant repositioning and addressed some of the outcomes of the KPMG reports. And so the organization was repositioned in order to address the challenges that those reports identified. At the same time, around about 2015, that was the first time that TLAs had to produce a 30-year infrastructure strategy. And we started working on that infrastructure strategy for the first time. And as through that process, we had to put together a document or a plan for the next 30 years with an express purpose, as outlined by the Office of the Auditor General, to identify significant infrastructure issues, the principal options for managing those issues, and the implications of those options to be embedded into Council's annual plans, long-term plans, and consistent strategic management approaches. So that was the first time the infrastructure strategy started in 2015, recognizing and addressing those issues.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Can I just ask, was that applicable to all territorial authorities around the country?
Councillor Rose,
Oh, sorry.
I'll save the questions till after the presentation. If you just note it, because I'm sure we've all got.
Thank you.
Your Worship, the answer is yes. So the infrastructure strategy started formulated in 2015 with a whole range of strategies that were refined and optimized over the next 3 years of the, of the first LTP. As part of those, processes, we have addressed a number of key services, and we have identified, a scope of activities that presented a risk to the organization at various levels, whether those risks were environmental, were statutory compliance, were financial, or health and safety, all levels of service. So as part of that, a comprehensive assessment of the network of wastewater services, its condition and its current and future demands on these operations was attempted at that point in time. We identified at that point in time at least 7 major challenges in the operation and management of the wastewater services. One was that of an aging network. The wastewater system in Rotorua started developing in the late 1800s with peaks and troughs, for about 40 or 50 years. But it started accelerating post-war in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with a major reticulation taking place in those decades. In a sense, what we have identified through our infrastructure strategy and the conditioning assessment of our network is that by 2018, the wastewater network has passed its halfway life. The replacement value of the wastewater network incidentally, it's about $400 million. What it meant is that age-wise, and when we say age, when we talk about assets, we mean the design life of each asset. Everything we put into the ground has got a nominal design life, and that's how we measure the age of an asset. There are subsequent, obviously, investigations aligning age with actual condition, demand, capacity, new regulations, and so on. But generally, the assets supporting the wastewater services were becoming of an old age and passing halfway through their design life, which meant that about $200 million worth of the replacement value has not been replaced. Yeah. And you can see in front of you there, as a result of the age and the information in terms of conditioning we had, it identified very clearly that about 66% of the asset is in poor condition, which means it's entering into an unreliability phase with associated service and compliance risks escalating. When a network enters into that phase of poor or very poor condition, it means that the expectation of an asset failure at any given time is much higher, and the consequences of that failure becoming much higher consideration. What we also identified is that during that process, you can see the network has been constructed basically around the caldera, around the lake, with the air pump components. And as part and parcel of 2 or 3 factors, we identified that demand would continue to increase. I think I'll go back into that process. The demand will continue to increase for a number of reasons. The communities wanted access to effective and reliable reticulation systems. It's been proven that the operation of septic tanks around communities, around the lakes, has been ineffective to separate nutrients and pathogens from our receiving environment. And the community increasingly wanted to see reticulated effective systems to make sure to manage those kind of risks. The second element was that Rotorua was growing. And most of the residential growth as part of our spatial plan has been identified to be around the periphery of the existing network. Therefore, if we're going to apply new construction networks in the land development sites, then it's quite important also to identify that, to ensure that as new wastewater is generated and is conveyed through existing pipes and existing pumps and treated through our existing plants, it's actually managed so in an effective way. And of course, the third way, and most importantly, our mana whenua, iwi, they started now saying that enough is enough. We cannot have wastewater contaminating our receiving environment, our fresh waters, and no matter what the standards were in the past, we no longer can tolerate that. So these are challenges in that aging network, because what you do have a degraded sort of condition of the network. you have increasing demand for more capacity, and you have increasing and rightful expectation for high standards of treatment and protection of the environment. Now, you'll see in front of you there that the network really comprises a complex system of facilities. Rotorua is not a big city, but it's a medium-sized city. What we have there is about 450 kilometers of pipes. Out of these 450 kilometers of pipes, half of them are asbestos cement pipes. Most of them were installed in the 60s with a life expectancy at that point in time indefinite. As engineering experience has proven since then that asbestos cement pipes do not have an indefinite life, and actually its nominal life at the moment ranges about 60 years. They may last 70 years, they may last 50 years. You know, the average life expectancy is 60 years. And also asbestos cement pipes are a source of hazards and health and safety to workers working until they are not handled properly. We've got about 87 pump stations. Those pump stations mostly were constructed in the 80s. Pump stations that now have a nominal life of about 20, 25 years. Now they're in their 40th year. We have two treatment plants. Our main treatment plant to the city with a replacement value of about $85 million. It's been constructed in the early 80s. It's in the 30 years of age, and is facing some pressures in terms of treatment capacity, quality of treatment, volume of treatments, and obviously, addressing new environmental standards are expected to be needed, through new resource concerns. We also got about 1,350 grinder pumps that were installed around Hamurama and in Western Okiri area as part and parcel of reticulation of those communities back in the early 2004, 2006, I believe, that have a nominal life of about 20 to 25 years. And of course, right now, we are entering to the end of that nominal life, too. We do have a unique ground condition in Rotorua with geothermal activity, and should not be a surprise to many people that if you open up a concrete manhole, you will find that it's been hugely corroded by geothermal activity, sulfur, and other toxic substances. I was surprised personally too when I first came up to Rotorua that a manhole that I would expect it to last 100 years in Wellington sometimes lasts less than 20, 25 years here. I saw a manhole that was installed only 12 years ago, and I need to replace it. It's so corroded near the blue baths. So the geothermal activity here in Rotorua has got a significant impact on longevity and the life expectancy of our assets. As I said, the age of the network, growth expectations, we have compliance with expected regulations to be addressed in the near future. Climate change is posing a significant challenge and risk for us. The climate change is manifesting two obvious effects. One is the intensity and the frequency of rain is increasing, and we have seen that in the last 2-3 years with increasing incidents of flooding and risks to our community, not just in Rotorua, but across the whole country. The effect of climate change in our wastewater system is that as you have an old system that's getting into past halfway through its life, cracks and joints and deformation are forming, which allows a lot of stormwater to enter into the system. For example, our dry weather flow into the treatment plant is about 18,000 cubic meters a day. On a very wet day, you might get up to 40 or 45,000 cubic meters a day. So it's almost a 3 times increase on the amount of wastewater, highly diluted, reaching the treatment plant, but you cannot discharge it without treating it because it contains pathogens, that is diluted from wastewater. So climate change is a significant challenge. And again, it is not unique to Rotorua. You can see through the following slides just snapshots of what's happening around the country. Auckland got 40 beaches that are contaminated with human waste and cannot be accessed by the community. We had Wellington suffers significant degradation of its infrastructure, and obviously, the same applied for media statements and media attention into that degradation and that pollution that wastewater causes into the receiving environment. In Taupo, we had a major spillage that contaminated the Taupo Lake. Around coastal areas, it's not unusual to see signs going up to say there's a sewage discharge and please stay out of the beaches or the coastal areas. And again, all these elements you can see in front of you are areas and information and experiences communities have seen and are witnessing at this point in time, and that informs the government's approach to the Three Waters reform. That is a significant driver for the government to say something is going wrong in the Three Waters infrastructure, especially wastewater and drinking water, and something needs to be done, and that's why they generated the Three Waters reform program. The other problem we had with regards to the challenge we identified is that funding and financing of the service. One can readily see in the wastewater services that to accumulate a deficit into the condition of the assets all the way through halfway its life, which translates to roughly to about $200 million of our renewed assets. That situation developed gradually over many, many years. We don't renew assets at a huge amount of investment every year. The depreciation guidelines for our wastewater services here in Rotorua is assigns about 73 years average life to the assets, which translates to about 1.5% of the asset value. And that is what has been assessed to be the rate of degradation and the rate of deterioration and the rate of consumption. And therefore, that's your rate of depreciation you found your targeted levy. Because we have $200 million worth of unrenewed assets, if you go back into the history of funding the wastewater services, you'll find that, at least I could not find any other evidence to that, contrary to that I have not seen anywhere where the wastewater services was funded for renewal purposes for more than 0.5%. Now, again, if you apply even the 1.5% depreciation levy, and you apply to do the unrenewed portion of the assets over a $200 million over a renewed portion of the assets, it's a simple mathematical equation would tell you that we have a problem that's been developing for the last 30 or 40 years, basically. And it's not easy to catch up with it overnight. However, in 2018, the infrastructure strategy recommended to Council, and Council accepted and commence funding the renewal of the asset at the appropriate level of depreciation of 1.5%. The other challenge that, of course, we identified is that, in terms of our operational staff, we are a relatively small size community which competes for skills and human resources across the whole country. And therefore, it's not easy to attract people and retain people in doing some of our technical operational roles. And our workforce really is challenged in terms of age, changing technology, ability to attract new young people who will see a career, a future into this operational environment all the time. So skill scarcity and technology development and keeping pace with the rapidly evolving science was one of the challenges too. And of course, the last challenge we identified, it was obvious from 2017, is that the government recognized the earlier degradation of the system, recognized the effects on the environment, the impact on our community. It recognized that in some areas, local authorities and utility operators have some challenges and initiated the program of Three Waters Review. And that was a challenge because at the end of the day, if territorial authorities are not able to demonstrate that they manage we manage our wastewater and free water services on an appropriate level to make sure they are stable, reliable, and safe, both for the community and the receiving environment. The obvious option for the government is to step in and impose a solution. So the challenge for us is actually to demonstrate competence in that respect. And that was one of the drivers for us looking ahead for the wastewater services and asking the question, how to address all these 7 challenges, and how do we make sure that we demonstrate competence and assure our community that we can have effective ways to manage those issues. Now again, wastewater services was not just the single service we addressed. Many of you have been around when from 2015 onwards, we started addressing some of the services in a systematic way. 2015, with our first infrastructure strategy, although it was not comprehensive, it was our first attempt to put it together. It was quite fairly obvious and easy to identify that we have some significant and urgent challenges in front of us. And I will walk you through very briefly through those challenges and the way we have addressed them. Landfill. That was on landfill until 2016. Some people said the landfill is adequate. It was adequate, there was no problem with that. However, evidence, legal documents, abatement notices, environmental monitoring, financial assessments, stability assessment, geotechnical assessment, seepage assessment would highlight otherwise. Our landfill had an immediate and urgent need to address significant risks, both to the environment and to the health of the people who are working there, but most importantly, to the health of the people who are visiting an open-phase landfill. So we took steps, and through a procurement process, we identified a partner and entered into a 15-year contract for the configuration of the landfill, which involved the capping and sealing of the landfill to address the historical problems with it, to stop extraneous stormwater getting into the landfill, to collect and protect the receiving environment, to network and capture the gas generated by the landfill, and to provide a stable and healthy and safe platform for people to use in a form of transfer station. 4 years later, this is your landfill. To get here, the partner we work with Waste Management. They have invested about $4 million in capping and sealing of the landfill. They incur the operational cost of that facility, and the landfill now is in a position where if we want to restart creating cells for depositing waste at the landfill, it's safe to be used. Where in the past, as it was before 2016, if we continue to put waste into that, the risk of a collapse of the landfill and blocking completely the adjoining streams was very high. The risk of leachate was reaching our receiving environment to the whole of the city and Puorengon stream, and the iwi and Manawhenua were really aggrieved by the whole process. But we've done that through a partnership, a contractual partnership with a partner who brought the know-how and the skills, and the competence and the financial input to put into that without imposing the cost onto the ratepayer. Then we addressed it. The next phase was our waste collection system. Waste collection system in 2016 looked like that. Based on paper packs, it was a poor level of service. It provided about 1/3 of the level of service of capacity we have today. A huge health and safety risk to our collectors, an environmental risk because bags were broken in by the weather and animals and spread around the streets. If we wanted to convert it into a mechanized collection system, we had to invest close to about $8 to $10 million to convert compactor trucks into mechanical lifting trucks and buy all the bins to provide a new level of service to the community. Our levels of recovery of recyclables was roughly about 1/3. Now we have increased by 70%. We've done so, and it looks like that now. 4 years later, every household has got about 420 liters of capacity to dispose waste recycling material to be collected through mechanical means. We've done that through a 15-year contract with an external party. We invested the money into about $4.7 million on buying the bins, and we gradually paying it through a fees we pay for that over the 50-year of the term of the contract. They have invested $8 million in these new mechanical arm vehicles. We didn't have to invest into that. And I would dare to say, if we go back to the community right now and ask them, would you like to go back to paperbacks? I would suggest that 99.9% of the people say absolutely not. And that's, that goes done through the active involvement of using and partnering the market with the market to deliver this improvement of service. Roading. You see, this is a bridge in Rerefakautu. We did not have in 2015 a gradual resiliency improvement program for our key nodes in roading. A lot of our roads that were potentially affected by bridges, by streams, or roads were next to streams. They had no program of armoring or protection for the climate change events. We started in 2015 putting together an armoring program. We partnered with expert technical advisors for external sources. WSP OPAS helped us in that for a contract of 6 years. And again, WSP OPAS, of course, is a Canadian company who's been helping us to develop a resiliency program. And through roading maintenance contracts, 10-year roading maintenance contracts, we gradually started improving the vulnerable parts of our roading system. The Rotorua Eastern Arterial and State Highways progress. Again, in 2015, my experience when I came here, and I think is not news to elected members, obviously, there was a designation for a Rotorua Eastern Arterial routes going through the Ofata area and Puarenga and ending into the city. The designation was in place for about 60 years, and nothing happened to it. My impression, and I think elected members' impression, would have been that the inertia generated for that stopped the government and NZTA investing money into other corridors, because it was always a promise that when we need to do the REA, we do the REA. Manawhenua, who owned that land, who's been acquired through Public Works Act and the appropriate designation in the 1960s, they were becoming aggrieved by this inaction because the land was not used for roads, but the land could not be used for anything else. And more importantly, in 2016, NZTA came to the council and said, we cannot, even if we had the money tomorrow, we cannot give effect to the designation because there's significant chunks of land we do not own into the designation, and we cannot acquire it because they've been handed over back into the treaty settlement to the rightful Manawhenua owners. So you have the designation there that became a cause of inertia and a cause of delays to do any roading state highway improvements on the promise that one day will take place. And you have agreed to lift that designation on the promise that NZTA will start investing money into Eastern, Central, and Western corridors. Now that took place in 2016 and 2017. We are now in the process where about $80 million of NZTA investment is in progress, both into the Eastern corridor, Central corridor, and the Western corridors. And over the next 12 to 24 months, we'll see continuous investment into that area. Recently, we had another $35 million announced by the CIP, the government infrastructure program, towards that end to enable housing in the eastern side. So again, that was a risk of staying with the existing designation, not lifting the designation, and not compelling NZTA to the investment into our city, and that was also becoming a reason for constraining growth into the environment, because NZTA would object to resource concerns for new land development because the roading capacity was inadequate to meet the demand on these areas. LED lighting, again, since 2015, I've been hearing that we need to convert our lighting of 5,500 street lights to LED for a number of reasons, for improvements to the level of service, for improvements to efficiency, for improvements to
Chair,
our...
point of order. Point of order? Yes, thank you. A question of relevance. The motion before us.
It is relevant. This is relevant. This is the case for change that we're getting very
relevance
clearly
to the
later.
motion. The relevance to the motion that we enter into a 10-year contract with Trinity. How is this relevant?
This is the recommendation.
I rule that this is highly relevant. It's showing how we've brought about change through contracting arrangements and partnership. Carry on, please, Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. LED lighting, it was one of these fundamental services that require to be upgraded to reduce our or to improve our contribution to climate change. Again, if I go back, the landfill capping and sealing, it made a huge contribution to our emissions levels. Landfill was a source of 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions as an organization. The capping and sealing eliminated that. We have now a contract for LED replacement lights, and that will be funded through partnering with NZTA, who is funding 85% of the capital costs. And the effect of that will be completed by the end, in 12 months' time, and then we will be achieving further 50% energy savings. Active motor transports. Rotorua has always been a mecca or a center of attention for mountain biking, for active modes of transport, for active recreation areas, but our urban cycleway program, urban cycleway network was really deficient. We collaborated with the private sector in terms of construction and collaborated with the funding agency of the government, and we secured about 70% of the funding to construct 30 kilometers of sheer paths. We, in 2015 and 2016, we developed a network plan, which as you see to your left there, and we started constructing it. We are at now have completed 30 kilometers of the sheer paths, and we are witnessing up to 80% in some areas of improvements to school kids walking and cycling to schools. The net effect of that is we estimate at least 6,000 less vehicle movements a day become unnecessary to drop the kids to school and pick them up. And that's a significant contribution to the health of our young people and to the emissions, to the environment. Again, that was done through collaboration and partnering with the external parties. Drinking water. We have 10 sources of drinking water, all from good sources of spring water. And we are very fortunate to have that water. We are very lucky to have access to that water. And that water, access to that water, it's not a right. Many times we need the agreement and the blessing and the collaboration of Mana Whenua to do that. It is not, we cannot take it for granted. The Havelock North indicated very clearly that you cannot assume that the water you drink is safe. You have to make it safe. We did not have a comprehensive system of water treating that will assure the community that the water that arrives at the end of our taps is always fit for purpose and meets water quality standards. We started a program of putting UV treatment to every one of our sources of water, and last year we have completed that program. What you see in front of you is a UV treatment process. We don't produce that. We don't have the technology, the knowledge, or the expertise, to do that sort of thing. We collaborate with the sector, expert sector, to help us achieve that. But right now, last financial year, we got ticks by the water quality standards. We meet all our sources of water, and right now the community can rest assured that the water that arrives at their taps is the appropriate quality. Finally, by 2015, we started looking into some of the legacy issues with the reticulation of wastewater in some of our lakes communities. Now, again, I was not here, but I've read a lot, so I have a fairly good understanding about what happened in Rotorua. My understanding that by 2012, after a number of years of efforts, an environment court application for the resource consent was rejected. I've read the court's rationale for that rejection, and basically the judge said our consultation and meaningful involvement with iwi to that effect was substandard. when we started when the Rotorua Rotoiti Steering Committee reconvened in 2014, I think they've made another effort to bring together a new consensus onto what we need to achieve down there. It is a lot of hard work has gone in there too, and that hard work was required to a large degree because a significant deficit of trust was developed between the council and the local communities. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but actually to manage to bridge that deficit of trust takes a lot of effort and a lot of understanding and a lot of patience. I'm proud to say today that this is a very complex project. It's tricky from many respects. It's tricky from a technology perspective, it's tricky for a financial perspective, it's tricky for bridging relationships, amidst trust. However, we are right now in the stage where we have this state-of-the-art membrane bioreactor plant on top of Rotoiti. Rotoma is connected. We're going through issues of consultation with the Rotoiti community with regards to pre-treatment systems and in compliance with now the resource consent that everybody agrees to it, and we made significant progress in making that articulation system take place. We did not do it ourselves, of course. We worked through contracts with external expert parties. We had no technology or knowledge to build a treatment plant of that level, and we did not have the knowledge or technology to operate and test it to that environment. However, we collaborate with the expert sector to help us achieve that, and gradually we will finish that too. Again, Your Worship and elected members, sort of when we consider the background to the assessment of the wastewater network, its condition, the background to the fact that that was just one of many infrastructure service improvements we had to consider, we started a wastewater services review to identify how we can get to a stage where we have more confidence in our future management of the wastewater services. I've read into a media statement by a person this morning which says that the council has arrived at considering this recommendation in front of you today in haste. I find that difficult to reconcile with the actual reality. The commencement of a procurement process and consideration for alternatives started in August 2017. You see in front of you there a plethora of options, avenues, platforms through which both council and the community were exposed to that kind of process. There were, as you see in front of you, at least 5 council workshops and forums that we worked in detail the objectives of the proposal. It went through last financial year as a part and parcel of our annual plan consideration as a statement that we intend to go for long-term contracts. There was a statement of proposal that went now for special consultation process. You had the Operational and Monitoring Committee that receives regular reports about various aspects of our activities, and at least in 10 occasions, and that was open to the public, obviously, and to the media. On 10 occasions, progress was reported against that kind of activity. In terms of the latest statement of proposal for this particular consideration you had in front of you, there was 4 weeks of exposure to the on Facebook, was 4 weeks of Let's Talk on the statement of proposals Facebook. We've got information weekends. There were significant a number of information evenings and public gatherings. 27,000 packets of information went to 27,000 ratepayers. We received, of course, submissions from 27 people, which represents about 0.1% of those ratepayers. And, There were hearings about that too. So when someone considers a process, a period of time from 2017 to July 2020 to arrive at a consideration and make a final decision, the term hasty decision seems to be out of place. So what does the proposal do? What do we try to achieve? Obviously, in going through and exploring through the sector, and we started the process, as I said, in 2017 by an early sector involvement, which involved some 36 external parties to start with, which eventually settled into 6 consortia. But the main objectives we had is that it is to transfer, how can we manage our wastewater system in a way that is stable, is reliable, and is safe, but to transfer a lot of that risk as much as we can to the party who is capable and competent to manage it. Another consideration was that how can we get access to specialist expertise and to make sure that technology solutions are incorporated to extend the life of our assets. As I said earlier, half of our assets have passed through their life cycle process, halfway life. And no matter what we want to do, at the end of the day, it's unaffordable and it is impossible by the community to actually find today $200 million to capture the lost ground. So by necessity, we need to make sure we address the areas that are more important. Therefore, we need to focus on the critical parts of the network and make sure that their conditions is stable. And the reason we say that, it's because a failure of a critical part of the network, which are the treatment plants, the pump stations, the pressure mains and collector mains, any failure in those systems has got the potential and consequences to affect the health and the convenience of thousands of ratepayers. A failure in a residential streets that affects 10 houses is undesirable, of course, but is not as significant as a failure that affects 5,000 houses. And that is the difference between a critical component of the network or not. If your treatment plant fails to perform, it affects everyone. If a pump station fails to perform for any reason, it affects large chunks of the community. And therefore, attention had to be paid by necessity under the critical parts of the network to make sure we have a stable environment to operate from. Also, we have to make sure that, how can we make sure we have systems and processes into place and incentivize good risk management? There's no point of actually tasking people to do it unless the people who are going to do the work, they have skin in the game and they feel that if they don't do it properly, they will suffer the financial consequences of that. And obviously, as I said, in the 2015 and 2018 infrastructure strategies, for those of you who have read those infrastructure strategies, you will quickly recognize that the projections for the 30 years of the infrastructure strategy are quite clear. We have a good understanding of the condition of our assets at the moment. We understand the 7 challenges ahead of us. However, when you're dealing with an old and aging system, certainty about costs needed to dedicate it to preemptive, reactive, and renewal approaches to the network, it's decreasing proportional to how far you go into your infrastructure into your time. For the first 3 years of the infrastructure strategy, the level of uncertainty was about 10%. For the 3 years to 5 years, it was 20%. From 3 years to 10 years, 20% uncertainty, and from 10 years to 20 years, the uncertainty increased to 20%, 30%, and beyond that becomes 40%. The infrastructure strategy clearly articulates that as you go deep into the future, because you operate an aging system, the level of financial costs implied and involved into managing the system, and the certainty for that is continuing to increase and become less and less certain. So the proposal tried to, after going through about an extensive procurement process, identify 6 consortia. All of them had one common characteristic. They had one international player in each consortium. It had a very strong local service provider and a technical advisor. Out of the 6, we shortlisted to 3, from 3 to 2, from 2 to 1. And in November 2018, we reported to Council that we had now a preferred supplier, and the Council directed us to move on and complete all the necessary due diligence to explore whether we can conclude a contractual engagement with that. And that consortium was Trinity, New Zealand. That group was meant to deliver physical services. However, the proposal involves that the assets, ownership, control, and community connection stays with the Council. That was a fundamental prerequisite. The funding and the revenue policy as aligned with the wastewater services stays with the Council. That Council leads strategic, spatial, and master planning for growth and levels of service. No one else decides that. It's elected members' responsibility, who cannot divest it. And obviously, the Council continues to be responsible to manage their performance as a consent holder and to be accountable in the eyes of the community. We have no intention actually to dilute those responsibilities of the Council other than to find a party that will work with us to give effect to our infrastructure strategy of managing our critical part of our network. And then comes down to how do we manage that contract. Again, I had in the workshop we had in front of you on the 23rd, councillors, a significant chunk of my infrastructure group. You saw there that we have an engineering capability with many years of experience, both operational and specialized experience. We have young people who are up and coming and they're trained into the environments. We have people of mixed composition who have got some, females into the engineering environment at the moment. And obviously the infrastructure group will continue to manage that interface with this proposed contract as we manage now the interfaces with the people who manage the landfill, who manage the waste collection, who manage the, the water quality, who are managing the roading contracts, who are managing our improvements to reticulation of lakes water quality systems. So again, the infrastructure group will be in place to manage those kind of contracts. We have to make sure, and we will continue to make sure, we nurture and develop that capability of managing contracts, because we are at the end of the day representing the council and the council represents the community. We need to make sure that the infrastructure group has a role to monitor and certify deliverables by all these contracts before we actually make any payments to anybody. And obviously the infrastructure group is the entity within the council structure that reports to the council and is accountable to elected members for delivery and the management of those kind of outcomes that are embraced by the council's long-term plans and KPIs and related community engagements and undertakings. The proposal obviously aims to achieve a number of tangibles and intangibles. In front of you to your left, it provides us access to, in our view, a reduced risk associated with shock events. Shock events is a type of event that occur in Taupo, and I think it's the closest example we had where a pipe broke and you had a sudden discharge into the lake. That pipe should not have broken. And these contracts make sure that the risk of that pipe not break transfers that risk into the contractor, who will be responsible to proactive and reactive and repair maintenance onto that there too. The proposal involves a provision where the contractor is responsible to carry the costs of maintenance, both reactive and proactive. But if a shock event like that occurs and there are statutory penalties arising from that, the contractor will carry the financial risk in addition to the financial risk of affecting the repairs required for that. At the moment, the risk rests with us. The proposal provides us access to resilient and competent skills, and therefore, it gives us an opportunity to partner in an area where, in an evolving technological explosion, where new systems and processes are continuously get developed, we'll have access to this kind of skills without actually having to search for them and develop them in totality ourselves. Technical advice. We have access to a global employer which can offer career opportunities to people to move and migrate and to develop their personal career paths. As I said, innovation and technology will form a significant part in our future outlook to make sure that we are addressing the deficiencies we have inherited in terms of the condition and the grading of our assets. Best practice asset management is quite important to ensure a stable condition for the network and to address current and emerging challenges, and to make sure that opportunities for Mana Whenua are not just paper opportunities. The proposal from day one requested all 6 participating consortia to develop approaches and means by which Mana Whenua will have a meaningful and active involvement into operations and maintenance and management of the network, because a deficiency in the network has a direct impact on the receiving environment and fresh water. And Mana Whenua are a significant stakeholder and an affected party to that, and they want to be involved into that. In addition to that, the transmission and the migration of skills onto young iwi and another young people in Rotorua also paramount through apprenticeships, scholarships, on-the-job training, and educational programs. And we will talk a little bit right now about the financials, for this proposal. I have next to me Thomas Collet, who is my colleague, also is the Chief Financial Officer, and the purpose of existence here is to demonstrate that we work in that together over the last 3 years. I think in front of you got a physical copy of that graph because it's not very easy to follow it from there too. But I think there's a significant degree of discussion has taken place with regards to what is this proposal going to cost us versus what is the baseline. If you see to my left, or the right hand of the screen, is a number of bars that indicates how our long-term plan budgeting assessment is being executed. And you can see very clearly there is to the extreme right of the graph from the year 18-19, we started seeing some upward trends in the cost of the wastewater services. And you can see the percentages increases there. Now, of course, there are good reasons for that. It's not just random escalation of costs. What happened there is that over the last 3 years, we have new systems coming into place. You've got the Rotorua, the treatment plant coming into being, and it had to be added for depreciation and for operational and management performance. Electricity costs are increasing because we're using more pumping. The cost of unit rates for electricity are increasing too, and obviously the consumption of electricity are increasing too. And again, consistent with our aging network, we start now seeing increasing need for repairs and maintenance to the system. We can no longer cannot rely on a stable system that requires a consistent repairs approach when you have half of your network past halfway through its life. And you can see that increasing trend for the costs. In the current financial year, 2021, obviously, an amount of a budget was made a provision of that of a level of $14.9 million for this activity. However, if I take you back into the infrastructure strategy, 2018 to 2048, it will clearly indicate the level of uncertainty going forward as you get deeper and deeper into year 3, year 5, year 10, year 20, year 30. The level of uncertainty is increasing. And on top of the charts here, you see for the next year, we've got a 10% uncertainty. for year, for the next 2 years, 20%, and for the following year, 30%. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't exactly know how accurate that certainty it is. And I think it's quite important to be frank about it. However, consistent with good asset management practice, consistent with the recognized condition of our asset, the age of our assets, consistent with the 7 challenges you saw in front of you earlier, it is simply unreasonable and would actually be irresponsible for us to assume the costs we incur today will be straight line for the next 10 years without actually having a demand for increases. It's just simply not professional to make that assumption. And therefore, when you look into the future exposure for costs into this activity, you can see to the chart to your to my right, to the left of the screen there, you've got the now, 149 or 14.9 per year. The proposal is 15.6 per year, but it's got a significant risk insurance element of $34 million in that period of time that we are exposed to. Under the current arrangement, that $34 million, which it's possible to occur, but we have not able to accurately pinpoint at this point in time, it's all our risk. And therefore, the escalating costs will fall onto our shoulders. The proposal, the green line on the left-hand side indicates the proposal. It's fixed for the next 10 years. It's subject to CPI, obviously, but also our own internal costs are subject to CPI. If we don't subject them to the CPI, that means we're buying less and less services going forwards. And therefore, the proposal on the table there, it indicates the relative difference in certainty between a proposal for the next 3 years that is capped and minimizes the risk of escalation versus the risk of us continuing to incur escalation of up to $34 million. Now, that is an indicative risk exposure you have, and that is one of the reasons why we propose that proposal to mitigate and cap the risk through a contractual medium to that level. Thomas, you want to? Thank you. Going forwards, I think a question has been asked, and I will say it again, who is the consortium? The proposed contract, it is going to be with Trilogy New Zealand. There is a company that's been established in New Zealand called Trilogy New Zealand. Trilogy New Zealand partners with Fulton Hogan, which is a well-known made in New Zealand company for many, many, many years. They have a widespread presence across the country, and their reputation and their ability and competence to deliver services is without a doubt. And then another party is Stantec New Zealand, who provides technical expertise in terms of technical solutions to asset management. It is a rule of thumb or a rough estimate that between those 3 parties, Fulton Hogan will providing about 70% of the physical works. Trilogy will provide the analytics and the know-how and the water treatment and compliance regulatory risk mitigation process at about 25%, and Stantec will provide technical input about 5%. I might not be entirely accurate for that, but that is the level of split of separation between the 3 parties in terms of doing the works. There are other parties involved into that proposal. One, as I said earlier, is a party of Tiarua Collective, which from early on, they made presentations in our early contractor engagement from 2017. They articulated the cultural expectations and cultural values that would expect this outcome to comply with and to play a meaningful role in the process. We also have about 10 staff in our treatment plant, not our engineering staff, to work in our treatment plant. 60 of them are of retirement age, 60% of them are of retirement age, but those 10 staff all have been offered and have accepted through their unions, transfer of employment to the new Trinity New Zealand consortium. And as you heard the union representative last week clearly stating that they're comfortable and happy with that arrangement. So the proposal really, in a nutshell, makes sure that the local people who will be employed to do most of the work here. You heard Fulton Hogan last week, the regional local manager, who said to you that they employ somewhere in the region of 55 people in the local businesses here. They've got 2 depots, they've been here for 20 years. 93% of them are Rotorua ratepayers, 75% of that Tiaroa origin. And the other 4 or 5% of them, one comes from Taupo and 2 or 3 from Te Puke, I think. They intend, obviously, to use local people for continue these works. And it would be totally paradoxical and illogical to expect a person who working on the Rotorua Wastewater network on a day-to-day basis to be living in Auckland or somewhere else. Our wastewater treatment plant 10 staff, with the agreement of their unions, have been agreed to transfer to the under agreed terms and conditions to the new consortium. There is an MOU between ourselves, Tiaroa Lakes Trust, Tiaroa Collective, and the consortium who transfers skills to locals, and obviously there's a whole range of apprenticeships, scholarships, and on-the-job training to be given effect to. And there is an MOU between the consortium and Tiaroa Collect. We have also our own laboratory services. We'll continue to provide monitoring and assessment and scientific-based evaluation of the performance of our wastewater system and report both to us and the regulatory authority, with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. In order to arrive at the proposal, over the 3-year periods, we did not do it on in-house. We've used, and you've met these external parties, used expertise from outside to make sure that they tested our logic and help us with property and help us with arriving at the right decisions. We've used Morrison Law as a procurement specialist company to help us with all the due diligence process to navigate from early expressions of interest, shortlisting, further shortlisting, preferred approach, and so on. We've used the legal advice from Lane Neve to help us construct a proposed contract to be signed off. We've used, once we finish this process, we've used Deloitte to evaluate the financial risk, and Deloitte provided the reports about their assumptions and their expectations, their findings on that evaluation. And this is their own statement, which basically says again, the proposed contract provides for a fixed annual operation cost subject to specified exceptions. Sometimes people talk about a PPP process, a private-public partnership. Sometimes people talking about selling of assets. Sometimes people talking about the contractor taking control of the network. The reality, this is we're buying expertise and partnering with expertise to manage our operations and maintenance of our network. We also use the technical services of an additional expert engineering firm, Mott MacDonald's. It was quite important to use Mott MacDonald's because we have, as you know, on the go at the moment, a resource consent for the upgrade of our treatment plant. And the treatment plant needs to be designed and tailored in a way that is consistent with our expectations of our network. So therefore, the technical advisor in that respect was quite important to be involved because we, through the contract, transferring effluent characteristics responsibility. In other words, we expect the contractor, Trinity New Zealand, to receive and treat wastewater and meet the resource consents at all times as they are at the moment. And therefore, the technical advice provided assurance to us and assurance to Trinity New Zealand that the wastewater that arrives at the current treatment plants is inside a specific envelope, and they are comfortable to take that risk to assure us contractually that we will meet the statutory requirements of treatment. And of course, my own infrastructure team, in terms of planning, operations, and capital projects, was involved into that process all the time. If I want to take finally I want to take a little bit of time now to talk about the issue of partnership versus outsourcing. We read, and obviously cognizant of the issue of outsourcing a service, but I think we don't see it that way at all. This is not outsourcing. What we do now is outsourcing. My opinion, what we do now is damn outsourcing, and I will explain why. The cost of the activity for wastewater is broken into, if you could look at it into a pie, is broken, as you see in front of you there. We do not produce energy. We buy energy. We do not produce materials. We don't actually produce pipes, PVC pipes, HDPE pipes, galvanized pipes, or pumps, or biomembranes, or blowers, or grinder pumps. We buy that materials. It's an external supply. We don't own significant level of excavators and trucks and utilities required to initiate and manage maintenance and repairs and renewal processes. We have no ability, nor the resource consent, nor the capability to manage our biosolids. We need significant technical expertise to come in and give us advice about technical solutions from time to time in specific areas of the wastewater system. In totality, about 87% now of all the costs of the wastewater services is provided by external parties. And you see the little pictures in each pie there. The problem is that we have 87% of this external provisional service done by many, many dozens of different people. And I didn't mean to be facetious earlier, but when I call it a dumb system, is that for the amount of money we spend into this activity, about $14–15 million a year, we're really buying external services to deliver a task. On each individual contract or supply agreement we've got, we buy a task to put a pipe into the ground, to replace a pump, to replace a generator, to make an electrical connection, to clean and jet blast a pump station, and so on. Each of these tasks, though, is purchased on its own merits. None of these dozens of contractors we use at the moment has the responsibility of the overall performance of the network. All that responsibility and statutory compliance and performance risk rests with the Council. And the question needs to be asked, and that's what we've been asked since 2017, if you're going to spend $14 or $15 million to manage the activity at increasing costs, is that the smartest way to buy this service without actually buying in the joint responsibility, ownership of the performance of the total outcome? If you get someone at the moment to do a repair or one section of the 450 kilometers of pipes, that person has a responsibility to do as you told him to do or them to do. It does not have a responsibility to make sure that upstream and downstream of that repair, the system performs as it should be performed. And that was a fundamental question we said to ourselves in 2017 when we started the process. Do we have an alternative, better system that instead of outsourcing, insourcing? We are actually proposed through this recommendation in front of you to insource the specialist and technical advice and buying in, tied in by contractual performance and financial expectations onto the totality performance of the network from A to Z, from the treatment plant to the end stream up into the network. For $15 million a year, I think we have an expectation and a right and the responsibility to say we want to buy services, but not just task services. We want to buy your expertise, your technology, your knowledge, and to bind you contractually to accept that if you make decisions to manage a network or to repair, to maintain a network that exposes this council into compliance and statutory risks, you carry that risk because you help us make that decision. It's a joint partnering technology evaluation to make sure we get an optimum system to address what we said earlier, a stable, reliable, and a safe network. And achieving that through a partnership with a technical party that is prepared to put skin into the game and say, if I fail to do that, I will bear the financial consequences of that. And that's very important. The current system, or what we call the salami slice approach, buys tasks. It does not buy ownership or responsibility or technology share through that. And that's what we set to achieve, and that's what is the recommendation in front of you today. Now, in summary, I know it's taking a lot of your time, and apologies for that. However, we close right now. I think we started by making the case for change, the condition of the network, the challenges and the demands on the network. We walked you through some of the approaches we have taken historically over the last 4 or 5 years to address known risks and challenges and how we went about it. And more importantly, that we have an ability and capability and competency to manage those approaches to procurement processes. We have walked you through that the issue of, I suppose, the assertion of this decision be made in haste is simply not measuring against the facts, because you can see a significant effort over the last 3 years to both inform the council and take care to community expectations and to listen to what people may have to say about it. Also, we try to through this process to explain what is the role of the Treaty in New Zealand, the contractual obligations, our expectations, the financial risks sharing, and the partnership for technological solutions, and to make sure that you have a clear understanding that the proposal delivers ongoing relationship and responsibilities for the council in terms of ownership, levels of service, funding and revenue, specifying growth and spatial plan, and the consortium will deliver the services that we expect them to deliver to make sure we have a stable, safe, and reliable infrastructure. And of course, the nature of outsourcing versus insourcing partnership. I think it's just, as I said, the current system we've got at the moment, it's an outsourcing process that delivers us very little benefits, while for the amount of money we spend into that, while the proposed system will give us a significant partnering and joint and sharing responsibility, supported and incentivized through a contract to make sure that people make the right decisions and wear the consequence of those decisions, and they have the confidence to manage that risk at a tolerable level because actually they sign on to the contract to accept that risk. And that indicates the confidence they've got that the risk overall is tolerable to them and is within their capability and expertise and competency. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stavros, and we'll open now for questions. And I think for those in the gallery and those listening, that is a summary of what we heard last week, and has also obviously picked up some of the concerns that we've heard of since that last meeting. But we'll now ask questions for clarification. I'm going to ask the first one myself, Stavros. Why has it taken so long to get to this?
I think my response to that is that, as I said, we started 2017. We started from 2017 exploring the issues and making sure that we cover as best as we can, that process. But if you recall, in March last 2019, we were ready to go out for recommendation. However, the council, I know it's not this council, but I see you as a governance body, at that point in time, they said, look, we need to go to the community to draft a new plan of 1920 and let people know that we intend to go to a long-term contract. And the community feedback was not allergically reactive to that, as we know. But again, the council, you've made a decision to hold on to that until post the elections, to give a new council the opportunity to be further informed and make decisions following due diligence. And again, the new council, against all you around the table, have decided to go for a special consultative process so we can give the community another opportunity to inform your final decision. And that's why it took so long.
And supplementary to that, because we've heard it subsequently, that with central government now looking at a process, why don't we just wait? Why don't we just pause until we're clear on that process? Please, audience, if there's noises from the audience, I'm not going to tolerate it, and I'll ask those that make noise to leave the chamber. Could you answer that question, please, Steve?
Your Worship, there are a number of reasons for that. One, if you look into, and again, the government's position is not new. No. We knew that from day one, from 2-3 years ago, that the intention was there too. But if you look what the government is proposing at the moment, it was put in my first presentation, is that they want to migrate into a system that, in their opinion, will deliver better outcomes than historically TLAs were able to deliver. Now, they have on the table I'll call it a straw man of setting up regional entities to manage the assets, okay? However, there is significant ambiguity in that process at the moment. Who the regional entities will be? What is the governance structure? What is the funding arrangement so that how do we equalize the level of service between one community and the next community? You have about 80 TLAs into the country, and the government on the paper. Sorry? All right. Okay. Whatever, the government is proposing 5 regional entities. It would involve anything between a collaboration between 10 or 12, 13 entities. There is going to be significant discrepancy and unevenness between their levels of service, their condition of the assets. How do you make sure that those new entities develop standard operational procedures to deliver levels of service that equalized or responsive to each individual entity? So the government's own FAQs indicates that it will take up to 3 or 4 years to go through these processes. But again, if you do get to this process and establish these entities, does anybody believe that all these 74, 80 entities, all the contracts we've got, they are all perfectly aligned at this point in time in terms to be expiring on that particular accurate date, and say, okay, everybody will finish on that day, and suddenly you work for a new entity at the moment under new contracts. The expert and specialist advice you received on the workshop on the 23rd indicates, and my knowledge from my colleagues in the DIA indicates it will take anything between 5 and 10 years to get that level. So whatever you do at the moment is not really intentional nor inconsistent with that approach, provided that Council accepts that approach in full time, in due diligence, and after you have satisfied yourself that you understand all the implications of that.
Thank you. Right, councillors, time for questions. Councillor Bentley, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your presentation this morning. And yes, I'll leave it at that. What are the repercussions to council if down the track after we've signed this contract, Trilogy withdraws?
Thank you, Councillor Bedley. If Trilogy withdraws from this contract, there will be in breach of the contract. A contract always got two fundamental principles. One is the intent, and the other one is consideration. The intent is to work with two parties to work together to achieve a common objective. And then consideration, it says, well, I pay you some money to deliver me, you're part of the game. And the contract has got remedies. If you are in breach of your contractual obligations, then you suffer the consequence of that breach. The contract involves, in terms of Trilogy New Zealand, the parent company Trilogy Group provides $15 million performance guarantee, $2 million performance bonds, and of course it allows us also access to any assets they may have in due course. But if they withdraw from it, then they're simply in breach of their contract, and the contractual remedies will apply, like any contract.
Councillor McPherson, did you have another question?
Yes, I have got several questions actually, Madam Mayor, if that's okay.
It's great if you indicate that, because other councillors have got their hands up too.
Okay, that's good. Well, good luck with that one, Stavros, getting the money from overseas. What are the financial implications? What are the financial implications if RDC withdraws the opposite to what Trilogy doing?
Do you mean, Councillor Bedley, if we are in breach of our contract?
We pay them how much?
No, if we breach our contract.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand the question. As you asked me the question, if the council decides deliberately to breach its contractual obligations, what penalties we may incur? That's what we're asking. Well, obviously, depending on when and how and the reasons for that, there will be reasonable costs that the contractor can claim from us, like any contracts. Any contract you engage with, if the contractor has incurred costs to employ resources, material, equipment, and you suddenly tell them, look, I don't want to be engaged with you anymore, there are financial breaches for that. Now, if you decide to break the contract in year one, depending what commitments they've done, that will be calculated under legal claim. If you breach your contract in year 5, the level is different. If you breach your contract in year 9, the level is different. But the contractor will submit a claim of their financial consequences of us being in breach of our contract. To that effect, I'm not aware of any case where council has been in breach of its contractual obligations.
Thank you. The other one that we've got is that we've signed this contract with Trilogy, yeah, and not with Fulton Hogan, and yet Fulton Hogan has been put forward as the front runner for everything. What happens if Trilogy and Fulton Hogan have a falling out?
If Trilogy and Fulton Hogan fall out, or any subcontractor fall out, there are a number of remedies into the contract. One is that Trilogy will not be able to deliver their services, and therefore they'll be in breach of their contract, and they'll have access to a $2 million performance bond, and we can call it at our discretion. 2, the contract allows council to step in and take direct management of the subcontractor at the same rates as they have tendered under this contract. So therefore, we can isolate Trilogy and say, we're not dealing with you, we deal with Fulton Hogan directly, and it will pay Fulton Hogan the same rates and as per the contract.
Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I have 4 questions.
Thank you.
The first concerns the awarding of a $1 million annual contract. I want to ask if they've been awarded a $1 million annual contract to embed 3 managers in the plant, and if so, when can we see a systematic evaluation of that contract and its outcomes before we're going to be asked to consider another?
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. First of all, I will take a little bit of time on that because I have been in receipt personally from this, from emails and letters by some parties who may or may not be in this room regarding these allegations. In July 2019, we went to the public and consulted with regards to an intention for the long-term contract. In August 2019, we commissioned the wastewater treatment plant for Rotorua, which is a membrane bioreactor plant, which has got the same kind of design capabilities and technological complications as the proposed wastewater treatment plant here in Rotorua, which is under resource concern at the moment. That wastewater treatment plant in Rotorua needed to go to be commissioned and to satisfy the regulatory authority of the regional council that it meets its consent conditions. It needed to be commissioned through 9 phases. Those 9 phases require different elements of inputs and monitoring and stepping in processes. Now, Trinity water experts were available to us to help us do it because we simply did not have expertise. So we commissioned them under a specific contract to commission the phasing of the Rotorua treatment plant in August 19. The second element that we commissioned experts from Trinity to do that work was that the treatment plant in Rotorua City reached the end of its life in some components. For example, the dewatering presses that manages biosolids, the blowers, and the removal of some membranes had to be replaced because they could no longer perform their function. However, we wanted to make sure that those machinery, those equipment we purchased would not be abortive in 2 or 3 years' time when we upgrade the treatment plant. Now, Trinity has been involved in tendering for the design of the new upgraded treatment plant, and we wanted to make sure whatever we purchased in the last 12 months would be there and be compatible with a new treatment plant. These presses were coming from Australia and from Italy. The presses are worth about $1.3 million, and they are on the board and now coming from Italy. And we commissioned Trinity to come and help us to make sure that those presses will be compatible, consistent with a new treatment plant that will be commenced after the resource consent is applied. The third element of work, as you know, is that they have identified earlier, is that we need to focus attention onto a critical part of the network. We do not have accurate information on conditioning assessment of our pipe network through CCTV investigations. We have commissioned a process to CCTV inspect 80 kilometers of pipes to develop our next 3-year renewal program. Now, we do not have the expertise to do CCTV assessment, to log the information, and to make evaluations about certain priorities. And therefore, we commission and combine Fulton Hogan and Trinity to make sure that we do this CCTV assessment as part and parcel of our master planning and renewal program. The total value of these 3 services as individual strands of work are $416,000.
Mr. Stavros, I think we are straying into current operational. I'll speak first. They are not contractual requirements of the contract that we're entering. So could you please keep your questions to the future state of what we may agree to today? This is not an interrogation that should happen at a council committee meeting. You have full opportunity to ask those questions at operations and monitoring. So please confine your questions to the state of the collaborative contract.
So my question number 2 comes to the statement of proposal, and I'd just like it confirmed that the contract is going to start at $15.6 million a year over 10 years, and it's going to be CPI indexed, which is currently running at 2.5%. If we apply that amount, it means it's going to compound over those 10 years to about $20 million per annum by the end of the 10 years. And part B of this question is that the contract itself, not only being CPI indexed, it's got to be flexible enough to meet the cost of achieving agreed performance standards in any revisions. So is it not the case, could I have it confirmed that it'll rise, the cost of the contract will rise to 20 million per annum before demands for additional payments? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. The majority of our contracts are CPI indexed, and our current operation is also CPI indexed. So the same CPI that we will likely face with this future contract is the same inflationary pressures that this organisation will face itself, because we will be buying the goods and services in exactly the same environment. Now, whether it is the actual figure that you state, time will tell as to what CPI will be, and we've seen recent world events that have changed that dramatically. However, if you do look at our LTP, you will see the impact of the assumed inflation across that 10 years, and you will also see that our current operations will rise to keep up with the rate of inflation. Now, if you choose not to do that, you're going back to the past, whereby we don't wish to put up our rates to fund our services because of inflation, and in a way, therefore, you will have to therefore underspend to stay within the funding envelope.
Now we've got a question.
Wait, surely I had 4 questions. I've asked 2.
2, certainly.
2 more? Thank you. I'll just say in passing that ratepayers were delighted to have their rates CPI indexed. But let me move on to the question of the profit that will be leaving our community, our economy, and ask you, given the external expert who submitted the council hearings estimate that Trilogy normally has between 16.5 and 19.9% of revenue as its standard profit, that indicates that between 2.6 and 3.1 million will be taken from targeted rates each year and will increase slightly as years go on. Can you confirm that, please?
Councillor McPherson, no, I can't. And I don't know what is the basis of your expert assumption, and I don't really intend to dwell into speculation. I think that, I hope any contractor that works for the council makes a reasonable margin on their works. There's nothing work for the council or any principal to work with any contractor that doesn't make money or loses money into the contract. I think that is a recipe for disaster. Now, I have no intention of actually speculating onto what you call an expert and making money on this contract. I know, I can tell you, is nowhere near that amount.
I'll go to my fourth and final question. Thank you, Your Worship. Is it the case or not that within the contract with Trilogy, there is an obligation on council, if it withdraws from the contract, that they're obliged to hand over 5 years' profit?
Councillor McPherson, I said it to Councillor Bentley earlier. You implying that council will breach its contractual obligations. Therefore, there are consequences into that. And yes, some of the consequences is to calculate what would have been the expected margins that the contractor may lose on a period of time that applies to the breach of the council's obligations. However, I find it extremely difficult for you or me or anyone else to find any contract that allows any party of that contract to breach its obligation without financial consequences.
So, in short, the answer is yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I say again, it stands to a really basic knowledge of the law to say that if you breach your contractual obligations, you will face consequences.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you that we've had the opportunity yet again to actually hear what the proposal is and the recommendation in front of us. I do have a question, and thank you also, Stavros, for highlighting that this is actually nothing new. We have significant relationships and partnerships right now, and I must say also the significant one for me is with the local iwi, who are familiar with the proposal and who have given their blessing to it, I might add. Look, I do have a question, and it is around our infrastructure assets. You did mention that 66% of them are either in poor or very poor condition. And that does worry me because I have heard that this is what we've got in front of us is really a result of underinvestment in our infrastructure for over 30 years. And that's why we find ourselves in this position. But in 10 years' time, with Trilogy having been on board in this partner relationship, are we going to see any significant reduction, or no, I should say improvement in the quality of our network, of our infrastructure network in relation to our wastewater and our water system? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tite. As I said, the simple answer is yes. And the simple answer is yes, because most of our renewals will be applied to the critical parts of the network that comprise about 20 or 30% of the whole network in terms of value. I would expect, and it's actually the contract provides for dedicated condition audits of that critical part of the network in 3 intervals in the 2-year term to make sure the condition of the asset is picked back from the current 66% poor and very poor, closer to 50%. So I would expect 17% improvement to the condition of the asset, and that translates to some significant economic improvement for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros, for once again running through them. You can see we are quite passionate about water. I've always think that water has been more more than just a commodity. Stavros, getting back to the crux of it, we've seen the implications of a lack of significant investment, as you've mentioned, in the 3 waters configuration of the last 20 years, with lots of councils with up to 20, 25 years of lapsed consents. My question is, if we've waited so long, why can't we just be hopeful that the government's 3 waters programs be a successful delivery? And my second question is, over the last 4 years of engagement that you've kept mentioning that we have over workshops and meetings discussed this going forward, has the word Trilogy ever been mentioned in those workshops that we are going to be engaging with Trilogy in the last 4 years?
Can I start with the second question? The work Trilogy was reported to the councillors in November 2018 as a preferred supplier for this after the tendering process. And ever since, your first question, can wait for the governments. I think that's a question you need to ask yourself, really. Are you ready, Councillor Kumar, to transfer $800 million of your community assets into some fictional entity at this point in time, without knowledge of how it's going to be funded, how it's going to be levied, how it's going to be used to provide a level of service and resilience to the community? Are you in a position to make that decision? I suggest you are not. And therefore, until you actually satisfy yourselves as a governance body that you have answers to all these questions, you have an obligation, and I express that obligation through my recommendation to make sure that this community does not suffer the ill effects of a poor asset management procedure that you have inherited. Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through your question, just in relation to where Councillor McPherson was going with his final question, Stavros, if Council, in due course, if these fictional entities were set up, was opted in or was called in, would that constitute a breach of the contract?
No, sir. The contract, that would constitute a law change, okay? And the contract makes provisions for either innovation or reassignment of the contract. It's normal practice to include into any public service contract to be able to reassign or novate a contract to a new entity, provided that new entity, as a principle, is of substance.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For years now, we've had a free trade agreement with China, many years now. And I'm aware of Fonterra being over there doing very well, Zoom doing very well. Many in the community have shown concerns as soon as they hear the word Trility. Can you tell me, Stavros, are there any others that you're aware of that in New Zealand are in a similar situation doing business in New Zealand? Oh, true, but I thought you'd be aware.
Thank you, Councillor Marx. I mean, we have a contract with Waste Management New Zealand, which is owned by Beijing Capital Group. But again, it's quite important for people to distinguish a company who is listed in a Hong Kong Stock Exchange as a public entity that you and I can buy shares into it, and owns Trinity Group, New Zealand, Australia, who stays in a company here in New Zealand. Well, I mean, the reality is that I don't know who the shareholders in Beijing Water Group. It could be you, could be me, could be anyone.
Free trade agreement.
Councillor Yates.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Kia ora no Stavros, o tira kia korua tahi mo tira o ngā whakaaturanga. Whilst I applaud partnership, I acknowledge that one of our submitters commented about the possible lack of innovation in this proposal. Is there opportunity during this period, during the 10-year period, to look at local innovation to help harness sustainable renewable energy as suggested?
Thank you, Councillor Yates. I think the contract actually incentivizes the contractor, the provider, to look for and encourages innovation because they actually got financial incentives to do that. If they reduce the consumption of energy, for example, through innovative ways, then obviously they stand to gain for it. If they find ways to reduce the amount of treated effluent discharges by converting into through a recovery process, they gain pumping efficiencies. So the contract allows us to do that, and the contract requires both the council and themselves to work with us collaboratively to continue to look for innovation in innovative ways to address future challenges.
Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the original workshop back in, I think it was May, the discharge point for the wastewater treatment plant was identified as a significant risk. How does the Trinity contract mitigate that risk where that is still currently going through the Environment Court?
Through you, Worship, I think it's quite important because, again, I heard that story. Can I sort of take a little bit of backward step on that? When we're talking about the Rotorua City treatment plant, wastewater treatment plants, it's quite important to be aware that the wastewater treatment plant is the facility that receives and pumps and filters wastewater. It's a storage facility next to it, the pipes that take it to the storage facility in the forest, and the irrigation system. That is a wastewater treatment plant. This contract requires the provider to continue to operate that facility under that arrangement unless and until a new resource consent is obtained for a new upgraded treatment plant that may change that. So this is an operation contract with absolutely no impact onto compliance with the current resource consent, which involves management of the existing plant, the pipes, the pumps, and the irrigation system. That will continue to be, and the contract provides for the contractor to manage that system in compliance with the resource consent. If the resource consent of a new treatment plant is granted, and that requires the change of the discharge points from an irrigation system into another land conduct bed system or an infiltration system or whatever it is, that will be part and parcel of the cost of the upgraded treatment plant, or to upgrade a new treatment facility and a new resource consent. We don't know that until we actually get the resource consent and actually go through all these environment code procedures to do that. In the meantime, the current facility, as it stands, it's highly unlikely to change, at least for the next 5 or 6 years. Because if we got a resource consent tomorrow, it will take at least 4 or 5 years to build the parts of the new treatment facility, test it, and verify that. So I don't see any implication whatsoever. When we get the upgraded treatment plant, then obviously, depending on the resource conditions of that, we will look into whether it's going to be lower charges, because if you don't need to pump into the forest, obviously you have less energy costs. If you pump it, if you discharge it near the lake, the costs are lower. If we discharge instead through an irrigation system, through a point of contact system, you have less systems and you have less pumping considerations there too. So if in anything, an upgraded treatment plant, after having incurred the capital cost for the upgraded treatment plant, I would expect the operational cost of the current treatment plant to be less. So I don't see any problem with it.
Okay, just one final question, Madam Mayor. This just relates to the work that we've been doing as a council for the last 3 months post-COVID, if we can call it post-COVID, or as much as we can be post-COVID, about focusing on economic recovery and investing in recovery and making sure that we have jobs for local, keeping money in Rotorua, retraining opportunities, partnerships with iwi and with government. Has there been any real work done to review the Trilogy process or contract or the way in which things are done to see if we can improve those outcomes so that we can actually build back better?
Excuse me. You've heard the workshop, and I think you had people from Fulton Hogan, and you heard from a Trilogy representative here too, is that in terms of employing people, all the people who will be working into these contracts on these processes would be local people. I mean, Fulton Hogan already demonstrated to you that they are what the workforce is comprised of. Fulton Hogan also identified that they have a chain of supply that is mainly local here, except when you buy a material that needs to come from Italy, or you can't just produce it; you have to import it. But in terms of servicing the fleet, servicing the chains of supply, making sure that they provide the services to help them deliver the outcomes of the contract, it would be local. The MOU with Tiarua is very clear about it too. It expects their Trilogy group, Trilogy New Zealand, to work with Tiarua to provide employment opportunities and training and skill acquisition to local people. So I think that's all. I think the expectation that has been constantly embedded into our discussions with both Trilogy and Fulton Hogan and Stontech and Tiarua and the rest of the community is that everything they do here, it needs to be designed and approached from a local perspective basis, and to really recognize one of the reasons that your worship asked the question why it took so long. Also, another reason we wanted to make sure the partners we engage here, they would recognize Rotorua has got some unique characteristics in many respects, and we want them to actually pay serious attention to that to make sure that they manifest in their operations that understanding.
Certainly that's an expectation with the Tiarua vision document. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Look, Stavros, I've been sitting here thinking about the 30-year infrastructure plan that is required. And all councils around the country are grappling with that, and to various degrees of success, I suspect. And obviously the reasons for that is, as you mentioned, the climate change, community expectations and ageing infrastructure and compliance and regulations and things like that. But with Trilogy operating in over 700 sites in Australia and New Zealand, it may well be, and this is my question that I'm posing to you, it may well be that the government now, in looking to how across the country this can be managed, they may well, do you believe, go to Trilogy for some advice on how we will be managing water resources in our country over the next 30 years. Surely that would be something that this government, or the government, or possibly the incoming government, or whoever, will be looking at into the future. Someone with that experience and expertise.
Councillor Tights, I think that's, of course, the government is already doing that. I think there are professional associations and organisations like Water New Zealand, and Infrastructure New Zealand, and people at my chartered professional engineering level, that I'm party to, that we constantly talk both with public and the private sector. And at the end of the day, if our program here proves to be a successful holder of levels of service, managing a system in a way that is going to be consistent with the government expectations, I would think that a potential regional entity here has a lot to learn from that process, and I'm sure they will be engaging companies like Deliberations and similar companies to get advice on that.
Thank you. Well, we've had substantial questions, and I'm now going to move that I need a mover and a seconder that the following recommendation of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee held on the 23rd of July be adopted. And I'm signalling that I will then move recommendation 1. Do I have a mover that the report, the recommendation of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee be adopted? A mover? We can now go to, so I am moving that the Wastewater Services Long-Term Plan 2018-2028 Amendment Deliberations be accepted. I wish to move, so move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Donaldson. Thank you. All those in favour? Oh no, we won't go to that point. There's a lot more water under the bridge yet. I'm very aware that it's probably time for a break, and we'll break for lunch and then come back into the discussion around recommendation 1. Thank you, Stavros, for coming before us. Thank you. I'm glad that the public heard your comprehensive response this morning. Thank you. So we'll now adjourn at 20 to 1 for lunch and be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you. So then I did. we moved the recommendation that the Wastewater Services Long-Term Plan 2018-2028 amendment deliberations, and this is that Council agree to enter into a 10-year contract with Trinity New Zealand Limited for the delivery of Rotorua wastewater services. And as the mover, I sensed quite a mood from even our presentation last week, where you think as a council we've done so much in terms of carrying the conversation forward from 2015, and then when you see the public response, you realise you never do enough actually for bringing the community with you on change, and change itself is the big challenge that we're facing. And we're facing it from two prongs. One is government, who's requiring much, much higher regulations and higher requirements, and the drinking water regulator came out today. Also iwi, really expecting us to treat our environment with greater respect and their role in environmental issues. And also our wider community that has made it very clear, especially after the Nongataha floods and that weather event and climate change, that they won't accept any failure of infrastructure or water contamination. And that is absolutely right, and that's the purpose why we're here today. We're also guided by the full well-beings of this government. And I think the thing that I've learned from the presentations that I've sat in since 2015 actually is that it's time for our community to get certainty. They do need certainty, and that's what they'll get after today, and they also need an assurance of reliance when they turn on the tap, that there isn't a flood outside their street in an unusual weather event. So I think today is a critical decision for us as a council to make on behalf of our entire community. I want to mention a little bit about the government proposal because there's some disquiet, and I've seen it since last week. Well, just wait. Just sit on your hands and wait and do nothing. Look, government itself has signalled to us that doing nothing is not an option. And if you're going to sit there and do nothing and look after your infrastructure network end to end on the three waters, we will step in. And we're seeing more and more of that happen. And I went to the Department of Internal Affairs workshop in Hamilton last week, and you could see very clearly from the steering group that they are moving very fast. We've got to sign an MOU with the Department of Internal Affairs to enter into a partnership discussion with government, another partner, about how do we intend to manage our infrastructure. When we sign that agreement, which we certainly will as a council, particularly if this gets through today, then we are able to also put our hands out for some investment of that 761 million that is going into the National Water Overhaul Package, and we will be in there. We could put our wastewater treatment plant upgrade and the solution that we will ultimately find with iwi forward for that funding support. So this Trinity partnership, it's really a collaborative partnership. I am very tired of the discussion about this being us as a council abrogating our responsibility and flicking this out to a private consortia that take the profits offshore. And that's what I've heard from many that wrote to us, some of the phone conversations that we've listened to. We are not contracting out. We heard very clearly from Stavros today that this is a way for us to collaborate with iwi, with major consortia that can help us with our infrastructure management and also help us with a partnership agreement with central government, and we can then participate in the government process. So I was astonished to hear from an academic in Palmerston that this has been rushed. I've been on this council since 2013, and I think Stavros gave us a glorious overview of the process. Those of us that participate in committees of council, as well as the council meetings and the workshops, must have had an understanding, must have understood about Trinity. Was no new news, it was nothing shocking. They came into the discussion that we had prior to the election. So today's decision's a result, as Stavros took us through, multiple workshops. And you know, of our 27,000 householders, actually we got 27 submissions. But they're 27 submitters that had a right to submit, and good on them participating. And some of the answers today, I hope, have helped the public understand that their concerns that they expressed are something that are included in the contract that we're going to have with this consortia and with iwi. Astonishing too that I don't think the public understands that so much of our infrastructure is now outsourced around our three waters. And I'm embarrassed also that the state of the infrastructure that was made clear to us as councillors with the 30-year infrastructure plan has been so underinvested. And that certainly needs an investment so we get up to a very sound baseline to give us our public confidence in us. As elected members too, we must ask those hard questions. We should. And you did today, and thank you again for that, about cost effectiveness for our ratepayer with safe and reliable infrastructure that we've all come to expect. Regardless of an option, there will be an increase in costs. Central government's clearly signalled that they're going to raise the bar on the regulation threshold so that the public has that right to feel that the drinking water is safe, that the stormwater is not inappropriately discharged. And we've also got new infrastructure coming on, like Rotorua and Rotorua. I'm particularly thrilled with the consortia about the innovation that it's going to bring, the science, the best evidence that's going to be international, that helps us and our council staff and the team here and in our wastewater treatment plant to actually have access to expert knowledge, skills and innovation, but also great to hear about job opportunities for our own people. And as Sandra Kaifong mentioned, you know, keeping it local as much as we can. And they're good questions to ask. So this isn't a time for us councillors to sit on our hands and say, this isn't the right time. Wait for certainty from government. I've been in government. That is clearly going to take at least 3 to 5 years till we get certainty with any outcome from the next election. And government won't come in and bail us out. This is our responsibility. It's our environment, our people and our infrastructure. And we're not prepared to tolerate failures in the system. And I'm not prepared to carry the risk by us saying today that we will not support this decision today. If you keep things the same as they are, you'll get the same results. We will all risk another Nongataha, or even worse next time. I always remember Stavros coming to us to actually report that wasn't a localised event. It was much wider. It went out into the rural sector, it went into the old established part of our town, and we need to do something about it. And today is our opportunity to enter into an innovative partnership collaboration. It'll bring greater expertise, technical expertise. I'm very happy about the contract with the right to audit, the non-payment for service failure, all those sorts of things that we as councillors had the right to ask. And I thank you, Councillor Tapsell, for actually asking those questions at the table, because we need that assurance for our community about the contractual obligations that go with our decision today. So in making the decision today, simply in a nutshell, to not make a decision, you are risking our infrastructure, and you are agreeing to keep that very high level of risk within our council. It's not a safe decision, that decision, and for me, it is not defensible and it's irresponsible. So I look forward to the rest of the debate today. And we'll move on now. Every councillor has the right of 5 minutes to speak, and I think this is such a momentous decision. Every councillor is encouraged to take up that opportunity. So we'll start with Councillor McPherson. Do you wish the opportunity to speak today?
I'd prefer to listen and wait and speak much closer to the end, if you don't mind.
No, I'm offering the opportunity.
If I'm being obliged to speak first.
Well, I could ask another... Yes, no, you're obliged. We usually go around the table, so Councillor McPherson.
Very good. Yes, because I noticed at the beginning of this debate I was once again vilified. This little ritual...
Councillor McPherson.
This little ritual. And,
anyway. I'm not accepting that, and I will not accept those words, and I'll put you on notice, Councillor McPherson. Right. If you use inflammatory statements like that, I will rise, ask you to withdraw and apologise. There was nothing inflammatory that I heard. If you refuse to comply, I have the right to ask you to leave the meeting, and I'd rather you participated. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this is a variation to the LTP, and it's backgrounded by concerns that ratepayers have got. One of their first rhetorical questions I've heard so many times is, look, instead of outsourcing the management for 15.6 to 20 million over 10 years and paying for escalating profits, why won't council consider reforming corporate management to fix up the problem, which is the current mix of internal management and local contracts? The other related rhetorical question is, why would council want to give away profits by having a public-private partnership, specifically defined, with Trilogy? It will add to the profits already leaving our economy to CLM for managing the aquatic centre and to iPark for managing the CPD parking. Now, this is all occurring in a COVID context where wage subsidies will run out at the end of September. And that's the nub of the concern that many, many ratepayers have. The next concern is about the way in which we've done business. The evaluation of the statement proposal was conducted at the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, where consideration of the central government's Three Waters reform program was essentially ruled out of order. And to me, it's not a matter of doing something or doing nothing. It's a matter of taking account of the very complex unfolding context in which we're making this decision. And you're absolutely right, Madam Chair, that as a government invites the signing of an MOU in August, in the next few weeks, to ensure that capital and operational expenditure on waters infrastructure is underway by June 2021 from the first tranche of 761 million. This is not mythical, this is not mystical, it is going to happen, and it is happening. As you pointed out over lunch, they're moving very quickly. But the associated idea of signing MOU is that we as a council will discuss sharing our Three Waters assets and debts in a partnership with super-regional not-for-profit entities and thereby gain access to second and third, even larger tranches of infrastructure investment. Note, without ratepayers paying for profits. So the first problem, as I see it, is we as members have not been independently briefed by the Department of Internal Affairs on their program. There's a small number of us that have, but most of us, I suggest, are not really in a position to make an informed strategic decision to vary the long-term plan on the relative merits of the proposed management outsourcing in a context of a reform program that's supported by all political parties to upgrade water infrastructure. The second problem of 4 that I spot is that the outsourcing proposal before us assumes that our council will retain full ownership of its water assets. It was the primary assumption. Full ownership of its water assets and related debt for a 10-year contract. thus keeping all of those borrowings on our balance sheet and at the same time giving away profits. The Three Waters proposal, in contrast, has it that councils sharing asset ownership and related debt will be able to move debt and ownership onto the balance sheet of these new super-regional water entities in return for massive infrastructure upgrades, not-for-profit management, and for expert contracting. And now that option is obviously preferable to ratepayers, but has not really been thought through thoroughly because we haven't yet had an independent briefing. The third problem I see is that resistance to the outsourcing proposal has been intensifying. Can't be denied. The weight of public opinion, the weight of evidence presented at the hearings, all pointed to a growing sentiment that maybe this is not the smartest way of going, and in my view it was also inappropriate to question the motives of those who gave critical feedback. Fourth and finally, the statement of proposal identifies 7 major problems, as Stavros put up, to do with our three water systems: ageing infrastructure, growth and demand, increasing compliance, effects of climate change, funding and financing, internal capability, and regulating the services. At the same time, the statement admitted that the current mix of internal management and contracts is not coping well with these problems. Awarding a management contract, outsourcing contract, will not actually do much to solve any of them. Now, the Three Waters program will potentially address all of them and help shift the burden of debt and investment and management to these new entities. It will transform our balance sheet. So therefore, in my view, it would be premature and contrary to the interests of ratepayers for elected members to approve this Trilogy PPP without taking full stock of the proposed Three Waters Reform program. So I urge all here today not to support the proposal before us. Thank you.
Sure, Madam Mayor. A lot of what I wish to say has already been covered by the preceding councillor, so I'm not going to repeat all that. The one thing that does concern me was Stavros highlighted the status of our ageing infrastructure with regard to the need for urgent upgrading of or maintenance of our $400 million asset at about 9%, which is roughly, coincidentally, around about the same amount of money that we're spending on the lakefront. But what I would suggest, $40 million spent on sewage reticulation upgrade would be far more beneficial to the ratepayer than anything going on down there. I reiterate with what Randall said, that I think we should still wait for the Three Waters presentation from that department, and that it was, I believe, brushed over fairly quickly here. And the fact that we're reliant upon Trilogy to supply the experienced personnel, in my mind, shows a weakness in our management structure here at Council, that we haven't promoted that internally all the way through, even if it meant paying for the education of people and indemning them to Council for a period of time, so that we got benefit of the knowledge that we paid for. I'm unhappy that we've put so much stock in the fact that Fulton Hogan are going to be involved. I realise that they're a very reputable company, but Trilogy itself, whom we are signing the contract with, has, to my knowledge, one other contract in New Zealand, which is Matterfy, and heaven forbid that we go down the track of where they are. So,
this has nothing to do with Mangawhai.
I realise that, but that's where Trilogy is operating at the moment.
We had that clarification given last week at the meeting. You should be very aware of that.
Okay, Madam Mayor, can you tell me any other jobs that Trilogy is involved in New Zealand at the moment with contracting?
I'm not here to answer your questions. Continue,
Fair
you've got
enough.
1 minute.
No, I've said enough in the fact that I will not be supporting it.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Te Manakura. At last week's Standing Committee meeting, I supported the recommendation to proceed with option 1, finalising and entering into a 10-year contract with the Trilogy Consortium. This morning, after another excellent presentation from our senior manager, Stavros, and last week's meeting, I'm even more convinced that this is the right decision for Rotorua Lakes Council to make. Our chance to be courageous and ignore the misinformation we councillors have been bombarded with. Thankfully, my delete button worked overtime for me. Wastewater. We've been working on this issue since 2017, some of us even a bit before then, and always it was putting it back. We have neglected wastewater services for too long. Time for positive action. At last week's SPNF meeting, Chairman of Te Tātou o Te Arawa, Te Taru White, who represents, by the way, 53 marae around our lakes, beautiful lakes, and also 40% of our population, he talked of the Te Arawa involvement and enhanced opportunities in partnership with Trilogy. Chairman of the Lakes Community Board, Phil Thomas, he voted in support also of the recommendations. That pleased me too. So did the chair of our Rural Community Board, Shirley Trumper. All elected members and people on our boards that help us get a wider view of our total community. And now it's elected Rotorua councillors' time, our time and our opportunity. The most diverse council in Aotearoa, New Zealand. 4 Māori, Te Arawa, kia ora koutou katoa, 3 Pākehā New Zealanders, 2 of Chinese extraction, Sao Shanghao, Xie, and 1 friend from India, Namaste, and our mayor. That is very representative of what we're trying to get as to making the right decision and making a major decision such as this. I think, I hope that the rest of our council, or a big majority of us, do support this and do something for our community. Mā te atua koutou e manaki, kia ora no tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to start by correcting a statement that I heard earlier, that I completely reject, that some advisors were working to their own motives. Their motives are actually addressing the clear signal that we've given to explore this, and I want to also point out that this has been peer-reviewed by many external experts, ranging from legal, engineering, accounting, and even the Auditor General, to ensure that the contract is factually robust. At the committee was really where I put a lot of and all of my questions, and I was pleased to see further information around the contract, which I was concerned about. And I'm really grateful for today and for our public to be able to have seen a lot of that information, because actually a lot of the uncertainty was coming from misinformation that was unfortunately, people were only potentially reading the headline and not looking at the article, but it's quite clear that our previous model didn't work. It's quite clear that we have a significant historical issue. It's quite clear that our infrastructure that services our community is not up to scratch. So for the case of having some experts in there to look after the service delivery, but council still maintaining the assets, the planning, the funding and managing performance, I do support what's proposed on the table. And I want to say that I'm supporting it because fundamentally this is about future-proofing our core infrastructure for our district, and we will not be doing a good job as leaders of our community if we weren't ensuring that that infrastructure was being managed to the best way possible. And I do support the way that this has been proposed, and I want to acknowledge our staff actually for the many years of work that they've put behind this. This has been 3 years, and in my 6.5 years as a councillor, I have never ever been through a process where this has been debated or workshopped as much as this. So I appreciate all the information that has been given to us, and I'm feeling very comfortable now today with my decision.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, before I sort of carry on with what I'm saying, I just want to make it clear that I am not supporting this submission. I didn't support it last week when even it was a recommendation, and I hope that it wouldn't have come to here, because I at that time thought that the chair would have been fair and
point of order, Councillor Kumar. You can, no individual councillor can criticise the chair. At the committee meeting is your opportunity to challenge. This is council where we sign off a recommendation, not attack a fellow councillor.
Thank you for reminding me that, Madam Chair. I believe sometimes when councillors sit back over here and criticise other councillors, then sometimes nothing is being stopped because they say it is audacious of me to be doing this and high note themselves while attacking some other councillors and saying that, look, they need to be more responsible and more learned. Then nobody stops them. Anyway, moving to what we're here for. Look, I just feel now, after what we've seen today, again this morning, we are now trying to fast track through a hard sell of a pledge we've made to Trinity. The submission has gone rampant over the last week, and I was hoping that the neutral proposal, rather than the forced one, that we have to deal with. I believe that if something is too good to be true, it probably will be, and that outsourcing has now been given a new name, but that doesn't change the fact that whether you dress a pig up with lipstick, it's always going to be a pig.
Goodness, thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to start by noting my abstention last Thursday. Like Councillor Tapso, I had a few questions that I wanted to ask and clarified about the contract and the proposal, and I thank Stavros and Jeff for providing the information, the necessary information for the questions to be clarified. This is a major infrastructure decision for our district. It's $156 million over 10 years, and I wanted to be confident, 100% confident in the decision that I made today. After talking to Stavros and those involved, I spent a considerable amount of time reading and analysing the information presented to me. And I wanted to mention and thank the presenters at the workshop on Thursday, Morrison Lowe, Lane Neve, Fulton Hogan, Trinity, and the union representatives for talking to us and explaining their roles and their experience. I thought it was particularly important for the union to actually be there, and having heard their support for this proposal, I think that we can be ensured that local talent and the local workforce is being retained, something that I feel is extremely important. And relating to that, over the last few days, I've heard from many people putting their views to me, and there were a few things that I thought that I wanted to point out and have clarified. The first thing relating to the retaining of the local jobs, that this proposal will not be shipping busloads of Chinese workers, of overseas workers over here, taking it over our network, taking over our wastewater treatment plant. That's simply not true. There will be no language barrier. There won't be a difference in our health and safety regulations. This is Rotorua, this is Aotearoa, this is our country, our rules. We know that there will be only be more severe weather events happening, and to have the skill, the talent, the expertise here to take us through these times, I think is really assuring. It was great to hear that Fulton Hogan and indeed Trilogy will be training our people, offering apprenticeships to school leavers, giving them opportunities to thrive and climb up those ladders to success and a bright future here in Rotorua. Yesterday I visited a Year 6 class at a primary school because the student leaders there sent us a letter concerned about the environment. And we talked about recycling, we talked about waste minimisation and about climate change. And I asked them about what had happened with, I talked to them about what had happened, as Stavros mentioned today, the sealing of our landfill. And they were amazed at just how big of a difference that it actually made. It shocked me how concerned they were about their futures and about the decades of underinvestment in our wastewater infrastructure. They've seen the news of what's happened in Wellington, Taupō, Auckland, and then they told me that they don't want to see something like that happening here in Rotorua. If our children this young are worried about their future, then I think we owe it to them to properly invest in our infrastructure and our future generations. I see this as an investment for our district, our community, our infrastructure, our rangatahi, and for future generations to come. And I think these are our mokopuna decisions. Thank you.
Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you're aware, I spoke at length at the SPNF meeting last week, and I'm not going to repeat what I said there. And I've listened today to the very passionate arguments that have come from councillors, from Stavros, and also from the public during this last week. $156 million. This is the most money that I'm ever going to get the opportunity to spend. And I don't take that decision lightly. And I think that what Councillor Maxwell has indicated is that we bring different views to the table and we aren't always going to agree with each other. It's been a tough couple of days and I've found it quite difficult. I've been reflecting on my decision where I didn't support the recommendation coming to this committee. Post the COVID lockdown, as we move into quite uncertain economic times, I have to keep asking myself, is this a prudent decision for our community? Is it fiscally responsible to ask our ratepayers to pay an additional 13 or 20 million, depending on which baseline you want to take the minimum from? Are we actually managing all the risks, or are we simply replacing risks with other risks? And we know that trying to outsource isn't going to be risk-free. I mentioned before about what we have, as a council, have been trying to achieve in the last 3 months with our post-COVID economic recovery packages and trying to build back better. And is this an opportunity that we may now miss to try and do the best for our community with investing in the community, keeping that money in the community, resetting in terms of recruitment, retraining and offering opportunities for locals, keeping that money in the community, and also being able to partner with government. We've been very successful at that thus far. If you look at the amount of money that has come into this region through the shovel-ready projects and the PGF funds, but why not allow us that opportunity to explore what still might be on the table and what that opportunity might be. For me, I still have unanswered questions. I still have some doubts, and I go back to the Office of the Auditor General's recommendation that you have to have the courage to keep on asking the questions until you yourself feel comfortable. And for me, I totally support a strategy around continuing to invest in our infrastructure and keeping up renewals and investing for the future of Rotorua. But for me, I have to stand by my original decision, and I do not support the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been reflecting actually on why I came into council in 2011 on a by-election. And I stood, and I must be pretty tenacious because it took me 3 goes to get into council, but I stood because I was not happy with the quality of the decisions that were being made. I looked at who sat around the table at that time, and they were mostly people of a certain age, certainly most of them, I would say, retired, nearing retirement, people who had the time to give to council and civic duties, not reflective of our community, sense of entitlement. They knew what was good for the community, and mostly representing the uptown folks, as I call them. Thank goodness when I look around our council today, those times have changed. Oh, don't worry, we still have 1 or 2 of those people sitting around the table. But thank goodness those times have now changed. And so partnerships are based on trust. And we have some of those trusting relationships already with various partners. We have the Te Arawa, Te Tātou o Te Arawa. That wasn't easy to get over the line, but because we have different people sitting here at the table, that has been a successful partnership that has benefited all of our citizens and community and our ratepayers in the Rotorua Lakes District. It has been highly successful. When Te Arawa are prepared to use their assets to be developed for the citizens of Rotorua, then that is a very trusting and a very supportive relationship for all of our community. When we sit around the table and vote, this is not a popularity contest. Leadership has never been. Good, fearless leadership has never been a popularity contest. And so we must vote so that we do know that we're representing all of our citizens in Rotorua, ratepayers and others who live in our city. The ones who ring me every day and tell me, Merepeka, I've lost my job. Merepeka, I've lost my job. I've lost my business. Your heart breaks for those people. And those are the ones that we represent as well. Not just the uptown folks. Not just the ones who feel they've got someone sitting around this table who is going to represent their views, and to hell with everybody else. We have to know that we are here to represent all of the community, and that's what we're doing when we vote. So I have to say that I've been pleased to hear the submissions. I think there were some very good points raised. We've had so much discussion on this. It is time to vote, Your Worship. Stavros, everybody seems to be out there in the community, seems to be a bush engineer telling you what your job is. But what you've done is you've brought to us the information and the facts that we need to know, not what you think we want to hear. And I'm pleased that you've done that. And by bringing all the other experts the other day, there's other people who've been involved in providing you with advice, we were able to put questions to them as well. So I am well satisfied. I'm not here to curry favour with any sector of our community. I'm here to vote for the long-term benefit of all citizens of Rotorua. It is not a popularity contest, but I will be doing today what I think is necessary to make sure that we are considering everyone in our community, that we're making decisions that will look for the long term as well. We can't always anticipate what's going to come over the horizon at us. None of us sitting in this room knew what was going to happen earlier this year when COVID struck. We don't know the extent of the impacts either, but what we can do now is to try to ensure that we provide services that are going to be the best that we can provide at this time, and we're going to put our best foot forward in a relationship that we hope will deliver on the best outcomes for our community. So I will be voting for this recommendation today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, e nei rā te mihi ki a koe e te amo kapua. I'm going to weave 3 proverbs within my kōrero today. The first is, mā te kite, mā te hanga, ka puawai a popo. With vision, with strategy, tomorrow will blossom. That was my statement standing for council last year. So this is my first time deliberating over what Councillor Kai Fong has mentioned as being a significant financial commitment for our council. One of the key reasons for me standing for council was the state and the disrepair of our infrastructure. The next whakatauki I'm going to talk about is this one, and this is how I was raised. E tipu e rea ko te ringa ki ngā rā kaua te Pākehā. Hei oranga mo te tinana, ko tō nākau ki ngā taonga o ao tupuna Māori. Hei tiki tiki mo tō mahunga. Grow and branch forth, tender youth. Take on and use the tools of the Pākehā for the sustenance of your well-being, your heart to the treasures of your ancestors, to wear as a plume for your head. Like Councillor Kai Fong, like Councillor Wang, being new councillors here at the table, including you, Councillor and Dr. McPherson, this hasn't been an easy decision. To decipher between the repetitive rhetoric that I have been inundated with over the last few months has been indeed concerning, let alone the numerous phone calls from well-intentioned people preferring that I vote a particular way, has actually been my greatest challenge. It was my greatest challenge at the table last week. Why? Because I had to ensure that I still maintained an open mind when I came to the table today. I wanted it to come to council today because I felt that this was where our vote really mattered. So with that, I want to talk about a couple of other things before I conclude with my final proverb. Mana whenua is a significant partner. Localism is critical. I look forward to this 10-year partnership and especially the innovation that will come from it. I look forward to working with our people, the John Giffords who did an amazing submission, albeit not agreeing with the proposal, but the effort he went to provide recommendations for us to consider was outstanding. I've often asked at our questions when it's come to this particular kaupapa around geothermal activity. Well, yet again today, Stavros had clearly identified that yes, we live we live in an environment with geothermal activity, which has significantly impacted on our ageing infrastructure. I look forward to the innovation that comes within the next 10 years of how we can build back better. To conclude, hei aha noa hau te mate ai, ko taku pā ka rito ka tipu. It matters not if I die, for I live on in my descendants, and I stand here, and I will continue to stand here as one day a grandparent making mokopuna decisions. So today, it is with that in mind that I support this recommendation. Tēnā tātou.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're right, Councillor Yates, it's not an easy job. But I don't make decisions in an environment of imagined scenarios. I am interested in data and due diligence. Public consultation is not a referendum. So it's our job to get to the truth of the matter and make appropriate decisions. Historic underinvestment in our wastewater infrastructure is a fact. It has happened well before, but as recently as the global financial crisis, as I mentioned last week, and the term sweating the assets accompanied a less than 1% rate rise. And yet we have had submissions at our annual plan for 0 targeted rate rise. In fact, there should be a rates cut. That shows the commitment to investing in asset renewal that would happen if we didn't have a contract that held council to investing in renewals. And we know that renewals have to happen, starting with the critical risk. So this proposal is about managing risk. And it's a risk that council can't afford to shoulder alone. I don't need a calculator, but I do use my GeoNet app. And in the last 3 days, there were 4 shallow earthquakes in Rotorua, within 5 kilometres of the city centre. What has that done to 50, 60-year-old fibre cement pipes shallow in our ground? So not signing this contract would leave us, in my view, with a sophisticated network of flushing long drops, leaching into our groundwater. And like others around this table, I believe in the term, our lake is a taonga, not a toilet. So I'll be supporting this submission.
Thank you, all councillors, for contributing. And it just shows how diverse that we are as a council, and probably how mature we are that we can accept and tolerate each other's point of view. It is different. But I take your point, Councillor Rokawa-Tate, leadership isn't a popularity contest. And the barrage that I've come through in the last week has been deeply unsettling for me. As if I would ever put my political career on the line to make the wrong decision on behalf of my mokopuna. I would never do that. And thank you for the whakatauki that gave me a bit of strength today about speaking out honestly. It's been sad to be confronted by previous leaders of this administration that have suggested that I will take Rotorua down a very dangerous path as a leader if I vote for this proposal today. Because we've clearly heard, actually, about the state of our infrastructure and about the lack of investment and the ridiculous arguments that we went through on the annual plan about 0 rates. And you can't do that. And we can't do that. And what we're really doing today is looking at the cost of managing our risk into the future. And for me, the certainty around this contract gives our community certainty of their future. Of course there's risks. There's always going to be risks, and we're facing them, as you say now, Councillor Donaldson. I just want to say in a right of reply that the DIA, Department of Internal Affairs, was welcome. It was for everybody to attend. We don't need, and we don't bring, the Department of Internal Affairs, who advises the Minister of Local Government, before us to hold to account their proposal. That is an absurd suggestion. And some of us got in our car and off we went to hear the proposal. It is absolutely in alignment with where we're going. And if we engage with them after today, we will enter into a journey of innovation with them as yet another partner, instead of having a regional regulator enforced upon us, where we won't have any say. And that's regionalisation by stealth. And you won't get that with my— and that is a tension between central government and local authorities at the moment. And there was a clear tension here today too. We heard it. There's been a lot of noise in the last week, some of it most unpleasant, and some emails that I would suggest to those that wrote it, please put them nicely to us, because some did, and we read them, but I'm very pleased to hear that the Department of Internal Affairs will probably answer the issues that were raised in those emails. Also, some concern about the level of concern about the contractual details. You know, as elected members of council, and you said it so well, Councillor Yates, we're here to make the responsible, right decisions on behalf of our community. We are not here to grill into the contractual detail to try to find fault and to try to find error. That holds our council executive, Mr. Williams, in a high state of distrust, and I haven't enjoyed that. But I have liked the questioning and the need for certainty that there is a contract, that it is robust, and that we can feel comfortable with our decision today. So we're not contracting out, let's put that clear. This is a collaborative partnership that we are entering if we vote for this today. It's not a PPE. I think we have to stop bandying those terms around. We will enter into many more partnerships under our leadership. So thank you to the staff. Thank you, Jeff, and your team. I've felt incredibly well supported by your advisors on this journey. I've felt that these issues have been put before us at many, many council meetings. But it was me that said, prior to the elections last year, we shouldn't make a decision, a rushed decision then, because that's the end of our electoral term. We should wait for the elections, new faces at the table, and then go out and embark on this procedure that is the right tool for us to do. And it's been interesting, and I thank the public. I think some of your points that were raised have actually made us think and reflect, and that's a wise councillor. So this is about change, and change is going to be very unsettling for a lot of us. But I would suggest in probably about a year's time, we're going to find that we're seen as yet again as an innovative council that makes decisions based on facts, makes decisions based on sound research, and actually works with the very best advisors that this country can put alongside of us. So I am now, on that note, going to put the vote. So I'm going to say, all those in favour of recommendation 1, that Council agree to enter into a 10-year contract with Trinity New Zealand Limited for the delivery of Rotorua wastewater services, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Aye. You wish your vote recorded against? Thank you. You can call for a division because technically then the names are recorded. So hands up of those. All those in favour, please put your hands up. Opposed? The vote is carried, 7-4. And I'll read out the names of those 4. Mayor Chadwick, Councillor Donaldson, Councillor Yates, Councillor Rokawa-Tate, Councillor Wang, Councillor Tapsell and Councillor Maxwell. And against, Councillor Kaifong, Councillor Kumar, Councillor Bentley, Councillor McPherson. Thank you. And we now move on, and thank you to the public that have stayed through that debate. That is one of the most important debates. I think the last that I recall as significant was the partnership with Te Arawa, and then some of our significant projects decisions. So well done, Council. We've got through that, and now we move on to item 7, Staff reports. 7.1, Infracore cash injection. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, that the report Infracore capital injection be received? Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Tapsell. All those in favour? Oh, Thomas, are you going to overview it, or we'll just receive it? We're just receiving. You wish to overview it? Oh, to receive it. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thomas.
Happy to provide an overview, Madam Chair. As part of the annual plan deliberations, there was an inclusion into the annual plan budget to provide additional funding to Infracore to replace some critical equipment. And following the adoption of the annual plan, this is obviously the process of getting those funds to the organisation. For efficiency purpose of funding, we've elected that the most efficient mechanism is to provide, to acquire an increased shareholding rather than providing additional funding. And that is because any funding that we do provide, Infracore is taxable on the other end, and therefore it wasn't an efficient mechanism of getting funds to Infracore to acquire capital items. Hence why we've elected to do it via a capital injection versus any other means. As you'll know, Infracore over the last few years has had its challenges. It's gone through a major rebuilding phase. It has new management. It has implemented new systems. And as a result of that, it hasn't been able to invest into some of these key items. In discussions with the Chief Executive during the annual plan formulation, it was highlighted there was a good opportunity to replace some significantly ageing equipment, which would mean a significant portion of operational funding could be freed up from maintaining them and utilised into other areas. Hence why we have asked and had approved through the annual plan the increase in funding to provide for this capital equipment. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Councillor Kawha.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Thomas, could you just say that first thing again? With the funding options, if it went to Infracore, if it was simply just a cash injection, then there were taxable consequences. Is that what?
Yeah, it's not advisable to fund capital equipment on one hand via a stream that is taxable, hence obviously creating tax implications. So it's very common for parent entities like ourselves to fund capital acquisitions and subsidiaries versus capital injections.
So just the second point was there an option for Infracore to either borrow itself or for the council to lend the funds to Infracore? Because Infracore will now have an opportunity, I suppose, to service that if they have less costs in relation to maintenance of ageing equipment.
There was the option to do it that way. We felt the most efficient method was actually for council to hold the debt, which can borrow at a much cheaper rate, and to provide the capital injection, which therefore helps Infracore set itself up for the future.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor McPherson.
Through you, Chair. The first question is purchasing additional equity appears to be implausible because we're already 100% owners of Infracore.
I have no understanding of what you mean by it's implausible.
Well, if we're already 100% owners, how come we can now purchase an even greater stake? Would that not be frowned upon by audit review and so on as being somewhat implausible?
No, Councillor, it's actually very common in the commercial world for companies and organisations to raise capital to acquire, to purchase items through issuing more shares. Most companies do that, so it's a very common transaction.
Well and good. Okay. The next question is that I recall a long time ago the chair of Infracore foreshadowing a $740,000 shortfall. And so I guess my question is, was this necessary expenditure, what appears to be necessary, not forecasted? Was it not budgeted for? And of course, alongside that, what's to prevent this from happening again?
So, first of all, Councillor, if the previous chair was foreshadowing that, that would have been in previous fiscal years. So, the very pleasing thing is, and you'll recall the Chief Executive, Matthew Scott, pre-COVID, presenting to O&M that they were actually well on track to achieve break-even for the year, which I think in previous years they did generate deficits. It's very pleasing talking to them that their draft results actually shows them making a surplus, even in light of COVID. And obviously that's subject to audit. So they're on a positive trajectory, and this investment is to help with them with that and to set them up for the future.
Final question is, can we anticipate these variances are likely to be incorporated in future budgets?
Yes, without a doubt that we would like to see Infracore move to a position where they are able to ongoing fund their majority of their renewal program through their own funding mechanisms, yes.
Oh, sorry. I need a mover and a seconder for the motion that Council approved the proposed $750,000 capital injection to Infracore as equity.
I'll move your wish.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Wan. Yes.
Can we edit the sentence?
Pardon?
Edit the motion, so just to Infracore as equity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Thank you, Thomas. And now a resolution to go into public excluded. There are 3 items for consideration in public excluded: to adopt the confidential minutes from the council meeting on the 28th of May 2020, to approve recommendations from other committees, and the code of conduct. The reasons are to maintain legal privilege, professional privilege, to protect a person's privacy, and to enable commercial or industrial negotiations. Do I have a mover that council move into public excluded? Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. So we'll have 5 minutes just to clear the room. Thank you. Mrs. Trumper and